Morning. I did see that Councillor Wilson was here briefly and then he disappeared. So I'm just gonna check in there. All right, it looks like we have Councillor Wilson back in the attendees list. So we'll just wait a moment for him to join us. Perfect. Thank you, councillors, for having your cameras turned on, and thank you for being here today. So the councillors that are in attendance are the councillors that we're expecting today. Mayor Ireland sent his regrets for this morning's meeting, as well as we are not expecting Councillor Demota at today's meeting. So welcome to our Committee of the Whole meeting for today, Tuesday, June 22nd, 2021. And our first meeting of the summer. We've been blessed with a beautiful first week of summer and looking forward to today's meeting. So it is 9:31 and I will call us to order. Councillors, you have today's proposed agenda in front of you. Are there any suggestions for additions, changes, deletions? I see Councillor Keller-Harantby.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath. Is it possible to divide 8.1 COVID relief restricted reserve? The transportation, I have a conflict and I would need to excuse myself from that. So is it possible to move it to A and B, and I leave that to your discretion?
Yep, absolutely. Making transportation A and the rest of the categories B. Is there any other suggestions for changes to today's agenda, councillors or administration? And Mr. Given.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor McGrath. Administration would like to request that we remove item 8.10, the Jasper Connaught Offsite Services Construction Award Contract. The RFP just closed on Friday of last week. Administration is still assessing and is engaged in a conversation with the highest evaluated proponent about the program. And I can advise that we have had a discussion with the developer of GB parcel. They recently presented to the Parks PDAC committee, and they were able to inform me that their timelines are a little bit extended from what they had originally expressed to us. And so the upshot of it is that as the municipality, we have a bit more time. Administration had been trying to get this project started as early as possible, but now we would like to take some opportunity to have a discussion with the highest evaluated proponent to ensure that we have the most viable plan when we present to council, and that won't be for today. And so our request would be that we remove 8.10, and that also means that we can, as recommended to council, cancel the special meeting that was to follow the committee meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given. Just by way of process, is there anything formal that we need to do to cancel the special meeting that was meant to follow today's meeting? Okay, thank you. May I have a motion to make the amendment to change number 8.1 to an A and B, transportation being A and the rest of the categories being B, as well as removing agenda item number 8.10 from today's agenda? Seeking a motion, please. Thank you, Councillor Keller-Harantby. All in favor? That is carried. May I please have a motion to approve today's agenda as amended? Thank you, Councillor Wilson. All in favor? That's carried. Which brings us to agenda item number 4, approval of the minutes of June 8th Committee of the Whole. Are there any additions, deletions, any changes to those minutes that councillors have noticed? Seeing no hands, may I have a motion to approve the minutes of June 8th, 2021 Committee of the Whole, please? Thank you, Councillor Journeau. All in favor? That's carried. Agenda item number 5 brings us to presentations. There are no presentations scheduled for this meeting. Moving to business arising from the June 8th minutes. Is there any business arising? I see nothing. Moving to agenda item number 7, policy and governance. Our strategic priorities are before us for review, as well as the 2020 to 2022 business plan, an opportunity for discussion amongst council if there's anything to be raised. Seeing nothing, we will move to the bulk of our agenda, which is agenda item number 8, new business, bringing us to 8.1, which we divided into categories of A and B. We will visit the transportation item first, asking Councillor Keller-Harrampy to exit the meeting, and Councillor Keller-Harrampy, I will text you when it's time to come back to the meeting when we're covered this topic.
Thank you, Councillor, Deputy Mayor McGrath.
Thank you. So as we move into the transportation section of this report, which can be found on page number 9 of 42 of today's agenda. Shall we visit discussion on this item first in relation to the COVID relief restricted reserve? And I will ask Mr. Given to open this discussion.
Sure. Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor McGrath. I'll just provide a very brief introduction. Council, I think all council members that are here were in attendance at our last meeting, where council received an unsolicited presentation from a private transportation operator who advised that they have a concept for establishing a public transit system in the community and to major sites outside of the community. This was an item that was also identified in the COVID recovery task force recommendations to council. And so it is one that council could choose to act on quite quickly. My understanding in discussion from the presentation from last week was that the operator would be in a position to start up relatively quickly. I have also had a discussion with Parks, and they are working on their end to establish a process to enable that as well. And so Parks will run through their process, but in any case, it appears that there would need to be some municipal support for such a system. The presentation that was received was essentially requesting a financial backstop. I think the intent is for the system to be self-supporting, but the request is that certainly in that first year, at least, that there is some financial backstop as we prove out what that system might look like. So you will see the recommendation at the start of the report, and I will say that if council was so inclined, there may be some alternatives to that recommendation. Administration put it in there for a 3-year term. It would be appropriate if council wanted to do it for a shorter term. And if council had any other adjustments, administration can certainly work with those. But essentially, the community would benefit, especially this year, from our increased challenges around public parking in the downtown core as a result of patios, and the reopening of Whistler's Campground, which will be happening shortly. I think the recommendations from the COVID Recovery Task Force really demonstrate that transit can be a part of the economic recovery of the community, and an opportunity to assess what a system like that might look like would give the community, the private operators, and the municipality an opportunity to decide how we might want to address it going into the future. So in the report, you can see the recommendation from administration, and I will open it up to any questions. One other thing that I should identify is the recommendation is that this be funded from the COVID Recovery Reserve. And so as we get into this and any of the other categories, we should almost keep a little bit of a running total in the back of our minds, because that is not an unlimited pot of money. And so any amount that we dedicate to any use will reduce the overall amount available that's to other things.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Mr. Given, and discussion amongst councillors. Councillor Butler.
Morning. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Given and Deputy Mayor McGrath. I, first of all, would like to thank the proponent, Sundog Tours, Mr. Hardy, for bringing this forward. I think it is timely. It is a great idea. And we're on a really tight time frame if this is something we want to implement in the coming year. I have to say that our brief conversation last week left me with some questions around the proposed three-way partnership and what it would look like what it might look like over the longer term with respect to inputs and outcomes and potential profit sharing and so on. However, we don't have a lot of time. So I'm in favor of moving forward on the basis of the recommendation from administration. And I'm actually very happy to hear from Mr. Given the suggestion that we might consider moving forward on a one-year basis, because that was exactly what I was going to suggest. I'm not comfortable nailing down something for 3 years without a deeper dive and due diligence. And we would need to be thinking about things like requests for proposals and the kind of procurement practices that we normally undertake. But we do need to move quickly. So I'm certainly willing to recommend or to go along with the recommendation with the proviso that it be for 1 year. I think we need to be open to options in delivery while the proposal has come from Sundog Tours, and I do expect that they are likely the only operation positioned to move as quickly as been suggested, but we do have to be open. So I would prefer a motion that does not mention the actual operator. I think that what we're talking about is a service for the coming year and not so much a transportation system. That is something we can look at down the road. And I think that we should be clear, pilot. So that's a lot of words for a small change, but I'm happy to advance a motion. Councillor McGrath, if you're ready to advance a recommendation to our next regular council meeting.
If there's no questions for administration, I'm happy to have a motion presented and debate ensue. Is there any questions for administration before we call the motion? Councillor Journo.
Can you just remind me of the amounts that we're being committed to or proposedly committed to, or a limit? Or,
yep, so in our agenda package, Councillor Journo, it states $24,000.
Oh, I see. Sorry, I missed that part of it because it was in the early presentation. It was a bit unclear and I missed that in that package. So my apologies for that.
Yep, that's the financial request. Is there anything to add before we open debate with the motion Councillor Butler is suggesting to move? Hearing nothing, I am ready for your motion. If you wouldn't mind repeating it, Councillor Councillor Butler, so that we have it clear for administration.
Sure. Well, I hadn't really specifically mentioned the wording of the motion, but here is what I'm proposing. That committee recommend that council approve a maximum of up to $24,000 to be funded from the COVID Recovery Reserve to support a public transportation service pilot project for the summer season of 2021.
Thank you very much. For the motion, Councillor Butler, Councillor Wilson.
Sorry, just to speak to that motion, well, not to speak to the motion, just to clarify. Councillor Butler, I support everything that you had mentioned earlier. And although, would we not name the proponent for this 1 year term? Because there's not going to be any other business that we're working with this year, right? So this is for this year. I agree with you in future. Well, we'd have to open it up to proposals, but we're committing to Sundog Tours this year, are we not?
Councillor Butler.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Wilson. It feels like one of those days where I'm going to be tongue-tied. I don't disagree. That's a little bit of a cart and horse issue, and it's one of the reasons I'm, in a way, a little uncomfortable, because we received a proposal from a specific proponent. I do think it's pretty clear that that's the direction we're going. But on the other hand, it's not impossible that someone else might come forward and suggest, well, we could do this too. And my proposed motion, while I'm not really tied to that specific aspect, would leave the final decision in the hands of administration, which would allow us to move forward quickly. So I don't disagree with what you're suggesting, and I kind of wavered back and forth, and this is what I was suggesting. But I'm not opposed to an amendment to name the proponent. I see Mr. Given had a thought. So.
Yeah, Mr. Given, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much, Deputy Mayor McGrath. I was just going to say, with the motion as proposed by Councillor Butler, administration would have the flexibility to evaluate anybody that might come forward. And really what we would look for is somebody who can deliver the service in quite a relatively quick turnaround, understanding the importance that council is placing on this in terms of timeliness of startup of service. We would also ensure that anybody that we would support would have all of the appropriate support from Parks Canada as well. That would really be seen to be a prerequisite. And so, you know, while it is possible that there may be somebody else that would meet those sort of qualifications, for council's confidence and comfort, I can say that with the motion as phrased, administration would be evaluating how we might support this pilot project in this year based on who can start up quickly, and part of who can start up quickly includes who has all the appropriate approvals from Parks Canada, considering a part of the service relies on utilizing parks properties and going to parks destinations. So those would be the things that administration would assess before finally committing the dollars that council had allocated. So I think that it really meets council's intent to move quickly and ensures that we haven't done anything that puts us in trouble in future council years, you know, where we've sort of fettered a future council's decision making.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given. Councillor Journeau.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and to the administration. I very much support this program. Public transportation is something that's been brought before us many times. Whether it's administered by the public or private, there's always taxpayers' dollars going to the program. So I have no hesitation to support this initiative by a private operator, Sundog Tours.
Thank you very much, Councillor Journeau. Is there any other debate? I'd like to express my support for the motion as well. I think that a solution that brings transportation into our portfolio and that enhances our community, our economic recovery, and it's a win-win across the board. I feel like this is super beneficial for both our community and for enhancing tourism and congested areas, specifically at the lakes on hot summer days. It's going to be a really pleasant change to see a transportation operator providing transportation. Is there any closing debate that you would like to close with, Councillor Butler?
No, thank you very much.
Perfect. I will call the question. All in favor? And that is carried. Does administration have everything that they need on that one section of transportation?
Yes, Deputy Mayor McGrath, and just to be clear, that recommendation will go from committee to council at the first council meeting in July. And so it won't be formally approved until then, just, you know, reminding council that process. So your council colleagues will have an opportunity at that meeting to weigh in on this as well.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Yes, we will see this back before us on July 6th. I have invited Councillor Keller-Empey back to our meeting, so we will wait until she arrives to move to B, the rest of 8.1. We have Councillor Keller-Hrumpy back on the screen. Mr. Given, would you like to introduce us to Part B?
Sure. Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor McGrath. So, Council, in front of you, you see a report focused on the COVID relief restricted reserve and a little bit of a deeper dive, although still at quite a high level, on some of the preferred categories that Council identified at the last meeting. Council will remember that administration presented essentially a long list of all the different possible potential options that administration could identify, and a number of them came from the Economic Recovery Task Force. Today we're discussing what items Council would like administration to develop potential programs on. And so the report in front of you describes a little bit more from administration's perspective what the preferred categories that Council identified last time could look like. And I can go through them maybe with a brief overview of each category if that would be okay, if that's desired from Council. I know that you've all read the report and you don't need me to restate the obvious in each area, so maybe I'll do it at a high level. The utility rate rebates, as Council knows, the municipality runs its own utilities program. There are a number of businesses and potentially residents who could benefit from some form of rebate in terms of utility fees that they have paid, particularly in the case of businesses where the businesses were substantially impacted by the closures required under public health orders. Council could choose to establish a program to provide cash rebates to a defined class or class of customers, which could be business or residential, or they could be certain segments of business and residential that fit within program criteria established by Council. At a high level, administration would suggest that the cost of that type of program could be anywhere between $50,000 to $100,000. And if Council were considering that, you should consider allocating somewhere within that range to that type of program. The next step here would be for Council to, at this meeting or a future meeting, define the class or class of customers that you wish administration to develop a program to target, and administration would go away, draft a potential program for Council's consideration. So that would be utility rate rebates. And maybe I'll pause just in case there are any questions or discussion maybe in each section. Yeah, I'll pause there on utility rate rebates to see if there are any questions for administration.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Are there any questions on the utility rate rebate for administration?
I don't see any, Deputy Mayor McGrath. So if it's okay with you, I'll continue on. Oh, and I guess, yeah, and one thing that I should say about each of these, and I will add it as I go along, administration would see this being a one-time program. We wouldn't suggest that that would be an ongoing program. This would be something that Council could do in the 2021 year, and it would be a single time use for that. The next was discussion around fees. Administration had previously identified the waiver or reduction of municipal business license fees as a potential option. At any time, the municipality may issue between 650 and 850 business licenses, typically in that 800 area is what I'm informed by our team. And the municipality could choose on a one-time basis to either waive business license fees for a period of time, or to provide a cash rebate for fees that have been previously paid. Again, Council would have to define the type of business license holder that you wish to target, if there is a specific type, or if it was all business license holders, that would be possible as well. Depending on whether or not Council chooses to have something that applies to all business license holders, sort of a one-year forgiveness of business license fees for all categories of businesses, that would put this program at the top end of $130,000 commitment. Council might also choose to target a certain class of business, and that would be to your discretion. That would be the lower end range of the cost of this type of program. An example might be if Council wished to provide specific support to private home accommodations businesses who do pay a business license fee. that would be a targeted class. If council chose to say businesses who were directly impacted by closures, that would be another type of class. And of course, how you choose to define the class defines how many businesses it may apply to, which then starts to lead to how much the program would cost. So that's why this one has quite a wide range of cost. If it is a narrow scope, very targeted to specific types of businesses, the cost would be on the lower end of that sort of $10,000. Could be, or if council had a very broad view of all business licenses, then that would be up in the $130,000 range. This is again the type of relief that administration would see as a one-year program. We wouldn't see this as a sustained program, and that is the reduction or waiver of municipal business license fees. Maybe I'll talk about both of the fee categories at the same time. The second one was identified by council. There was a question asked of whether or not we could consider subsidy to recreation fees, which is another class of fees that the municipality charges. Again, this one is quite a broad range depending on what types of subsidy or support council wishes to provide. Administration identifies that if it was a specifically targeted program to individuals or households in meeting some defined threshold of need or income, the program could cost as little as $10,000. But frankly, if council wants to talk about subsidizing recreation fees, it could run up to $1 million. And admittedly, that is on the far end of the scale. But as council knows, our recreation facilities are already heavily subsidized. None of the user fees, even at what we would think of as the full rate, account for the full cost of the facilities. They are already subsidized by taxpayers. And so it really is a question of how much additional subsidy would council wish to provide. And again, how might council define the class or classes of people who might benefit from that subsidy? So this is something that administration would recommend, really could likely only be done on a very temporary basis if it was a large broad-based subsidy, which would be quite expensive. If it was a narrower, smaller focused subsidy or program, it is something that could continue for some period of time, really depending on the scale that council wishes to approach it with. And those are the two categories of fees that administration had some thoughts on, subsidizing recreation fees and municipal business license fees. I'll pause there for any questions or discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given. Any questions for administration? Councillor Wilson.
Just so we know, business license fees, what are we looking at? Are we be forgiving like $100, or are we going to be forgiving $1,000? If it's, on that lower spectrum there, I kind of feel like this one's just really not worth following up with, or not worth doing the work for. Really, or forgiving $100 is not going to make or break any business, I don't think, at this point. But that's, I guess, what are the fees, or approximately what are the fees for certain types of businesses?
Sure. Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Wilson, and through Deputy Mayor McGrath. My understanding is that our general business license fee is about $160 a year. And so really, the maximum amount of support or benefit to any individual business would likely top out at that $160 that the council could provide. And I should be clear that in any of these, particularly with fees, in any of the areas where we're talking about reduction of fees or rebates back, we're essentially talking about a loss of municipal revenue. And so the reserve would be covering municipal revenue. So I think in terms of business license fees, the amount of benefit to any individual business is, really does top out at that $160, unless council chose to do it for multiple years, which would again come with a greater cost. Councillor Wilson, I think that is the maximum amount of benefit that could be derived from this program to any individual business, would be that one-time sort of fee of $160.
Thank you,
Okay,
Councillor. Thank you, Mr. Given. Any other questions regarding fees, both with business licensing and recreation fees? Councillor Journell.
I kind of agree with Councillor Wilson. I think $165 per business for a program. I just don't see the value there. I mean, it's a big loss to the municipality, but I think businesses somehow should be able to afford a business license to make sure they're in business. I'm not sure where the discussion has occurred, but I'd like to consider something else for businesses, and that's something that I've yet to see discussed, and that's lowering the interest rate on late payments, specifically on taxes. We're saying it's okay. We're thinking, yeah, you can defer and so on and so forth. But in the meantime, we're charging an interest rate that is quite high. It actually, represents a revenue to the municipality. So while we're saying, yeah, we'll assist you, we'll forego, we're still charging a lot. So I think under the COVID relief for businesses, you'd be targeting the businesses that are really struggling, really having a hard time. And I'm just trying to plant the seed or plant the seed on any discussion that we may want to have on that. But I think we should review under COVID the interest rate that we charge for late payment of taxes. I think would be more appropriate than this business license fee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Journell. Any further questions? Hearing none, may we continue, please, Mr. Given?
Sure. Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor McGrath. The next up would be tax rate mitigation. There are two potential programs that administration identified here. The first is very directly simply to hold an amount and continue to hold it in the reserve so that future councils for the 2022 budget and beyond would have the opportunity to use some of those funds to mitigate future property tax increases, keeping in mind that any of those mitigations would be one-time only, and then there would be a need in a future year to so council should see this as a one-time use, but could extend the life of the COVID reserve and the benefit of the COVID reserve on a go-forward basis over a few years. I think it's important, administration believes it's important to identify that the amount here would need to be something that would make a meaningful impact in property tax mitigation. As council knows, it's approximately $80,000 to reduce municipal property taxes by 1%. And that's how administration arrived at the recommendation that if council wished to save some to hold for apply in future budgets, we would suggest that it should likely be in the order of $400,000 or more, because if it is, if it was $80,000, that would mean that you could, mitigate a 1% property tax increase one time, which may meet council's intent and desire and is possible. But administration is suggesting that it should be something that would provide either some longevity, that you could do that over a few years, or that you'd be able to do it to a larger extent. And so that's why we suggest $400,000 or more. In this case, if council wished to set aside some amount, there is less programming that needs to be developed, and it really would be council defining via motion how much they wish to leave in the reserve for future tax rate mitigation. So essentially specifying the number that you wish, directing administration to retain that in the reserve for future tax rate mitigation. So that one I think is quite straightforward. The second is land rent advocacy. As council is well aware, the municipality has to pay annually approximately $600,000 to the Government of Canada in the form of land rent. This is a cost that drives up property taxes for all municipal property taxpayers. Essentially, that money that the municipality has to pay to the federal government is collected from local property taxpayers. Elimination of that requirement to pay land rent would have an ongoing benefit to taxpayers in that the municipality wouldn't have to collect money from them in order to pay it to the federal government. This has been a long-standing issue in the community and is in Council's strategic plan. Administration is suggesting that to really start to make some headway on this, we could use essentially some outside resources to handle the workload and also the strategy behind that. And I have had an early conversation with a firm that handles these types of advocacy issues. They advised that they could start up within weeks, and that the cost would be approximately $20,000 for a 2-month engagement. There would be a potential for us to see if there's an opportunity to share that cost with Banff, who also pay land rent. They may or may not be interested in participating in joint advocacy. And if that was the case, then we could share that $20,000 cost for the additional resources to really activate this. Again, administration would see this as a one-time cost, and is here for council's consideration. The next steps on this would be for council to choose to undertake this kind of activity via motion, and to direct administration to engage a consultant at an amount not to exceed blank dollars. I will pause there to see if there's any discussion or questions about the two opportunities that we see to provide some tax rate mitigation.
Thank you, Mr. Given. I see Councillor Keller-Harampi with her hand up.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath. I really do like the idea of holding some of the COVID relief for tax relief in future years. I also like the idea of the land rent advocacy, but I don't think that we should be using COVID funds for that. I think that should come out of council's budget. We didn't really in this term do much advocacy on this, but in my last term on council, we did quite a bit of advocacy both on this and alternative revenues, and we worked with Banff and Connaught on that. And those costs came out of council's budget. And I know in the past, like we've always had kind of some funds left at the end of the year. I'm not sure how we are where we are with our budget this year, but I really think we should do this, but this should actually come out of council's budget if possible. I don't think this is an existing issue. I don't think it should be COVID funds that go to cover this cost. That's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keller-Harampi. And Councillor Butler, you had your hand raised.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. The first would be for Mr. Given on the tax rate mitigation. You had suggested, Mr. Given, that it would be appropriate for council to make a motion that a certain amount be set aside for that. However, I think an alternate approach would be that we would make motions for some of the items that have been suggested with specific amounts. And my thinking might be that the remainder of the fund is left in place for future tax rate mitigation, which could be simply applied against future tax rate increases, or by either this or future councils could also be used in a targeted way. So just wanted to suggest that one way of looking at it is to make a motion to direct a certain amount to future tax rate mitigation. My problem with that approach is that it seems almost to imply that we are intent on spending the rest in the shorter term, and I'm not sure that we are. And I wonder if administration is clear that it would like to see a motion defining an amount for future tax rate mitigation, or if administration would be comfortable with simply an understanding that the remainder of the fund would be used for that.
Mr. Given.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor McGrath. Councillor Butler, you are very correct there. It really can be either approach, and it really is just sort of a matter of sequencing. At this stage, administration wasn't clear, what approach council wished to take. But if council identifies the program or programs that they wish to support, administration could do that, and that would define the amount of money that would be using in the near term. For example, the one that was discussed earlier, we have already identified that council is willing to dedicate, or at least at committee level, willing to dedicate a certain amount of money to a specific use. That's reduced the overall amount that's available to any other use. And so it really is sort of the order that council wishes to do them in. Here they're put forward without sort of that assumption of order. I'd suggest that the way that you were talking about it, an appropriate way might be exactly as identified for council, identify the program or programs that wish to support, the amounts of dollars they wish to dedicate to those programs, and then finalize with a motion saying, and that the remainder be allocated towards future tax rate mitigation. So that would be an approach. It really is just sort of the, where do we want to, which do we want to have first, the cart or the horse? And in this case, it really doesn't matter. We can do it either way.
Great, thanks very much. And for my part, I certainly am comfortable with the latter approach, that basically we define specific programs and expenditure ceilings or maximums, and then the remainder be kept in place for future tax rate mitigation. And then my second question at this point is just, or it's a question, Councillor McGrath, for a process really. I have quite a lot of notes and thoughts on advisability of the various ideas, but I'm assuming we're going to come back to that after we've heard Mr. Given go through all the recommendations. So the reason I'm quiet on my thoughts on the advisability of these items is I'm sort of waiting to the end.
Yes.
Until we've done on all of them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Butler. We'll ensure that there's adequate time for that. Any other questions, or should Mr. Given continue? All right, go ahead, Mr. Given.
Okay, thank you. Well, Councillor, our last category was economic development. And again, I'll provide a bit of an overview of each of the 3 points that were identified. These are all quite directly tied to the recommendations from the Economic Recovery Task Force. The first would be to partner to develop a destination management plan. I've had a conversation with Tourism Jasper, who are involved in this area. And we really see the opportunity for a holistic plan that is the connection between the visitor economy, economic development, and community well-being. There also may be an opportunity for the municipality to fill some gaps. As council knows, we don't have access to Part 17 of the Municipal Government Act, which is the planning and development area. Part 17 requires municipalities to pass a municipal development plan, which does deal in part and certainly influences the planning context of municipality, but it doesn't only do that. It also starts to provide some direction on municipal service standards and municipal operations. And in Jasper, we don't have a municipal development plan, and so there are some gaps that could be filled through a destination management plan. So we could sort of arrive at a something that is like a municipal development plan, covering the areas of our current jurisdiction, while also connecting more closely with the concepts of economic development and how we support the community and guide the community in increasing Jasper's consistency and focus as a destination community. The Tourism Jasper has identified that there are potential external funding sources. A plan like this would be in the order of magnitude of $150,000 to $200,000. Tourism Jasper believes that they can find external funding sources and would really be a request for partners to fund modest amount. So I was going to say nominal, but $20,000 is not nominal. It is a modest amount in the overall context of the plan development. And Jasper, or the municipality, would partner with other entities like the Chamber of Commerce, Tourism Jasper, potentially the Parks Canada, and others to develop a holistic view of our community and how we might manage that going forward, both providing some vision and direction for the broader community and vision and direction for municipal operations. So that's the destination management plan. The The second item was to partner to conduct a labor market analysis. Generally, labor market analysis have a deep dive look at the labor force to generate an understanding of the market conditions faced by businesses and job seekers, and to provide recommendations on how to develop a community strategy to strengthen workforce competitiveness, to ensure that Jasper has all the things in place to ensure that employers can find the employees that they need, and that the conditions in the community are right, so that there are qualified employees who are ready to make Jasper their home. Just to be clear, we don't see this as something that is only to the benefit of employers, because really, I think a lot of the recommendations that would come from a labor market analysis would be about the barriers to people living in Jasper regularly, and removing those barriers would be a benefit to those people to enable them to be here, and issues such as housing would likely come up to the top of the list. But a labor market analysis would allow us to have some good hard data on what that might look like. Typically, these studies can run in the range of up to $100,000. I've seen them up to $150,000. Potentially, Jasper would be a smaller amount. Under that $100,000, administration hasn't done that detailed review with the types of consultants that would do these studies. And to be clear, they would be external consultants that we bring in that have specialized knowledge. A study like this could take up to a year to complete, and there may be external funding sources. So again, administration's recommendation is that if council wished to pursue this, an initial amount that would be appropriate would be up to $20,000 for council to dedicate. Administration would have to do the legwork to come back to council with a recommendation of specific costs and consultants and everything else. Finally, the last area was to develop a guide to opening a business in Jasper. This was, again, a specific recommendation from the Economic Recovery Task Force. But in consultation with Community Futures West Yellowhead, they reported that this is a service that they see as within their core mandate, that they would hope to deliver for all of the communities that they serve, and that they would be working toward this over the next little while. Administration has confirmed with them that they would develop both a general guide to starting a business that could apply in any of the communities, as well as specialized or more focused information that would help people understand the complexities of starting a business in Jasper's unique context. So at this time, there are no additional steps required, and there is no money required from the municipality of Jasper, as Community Futures West Yellowhead sees this as being within their core mandate and something that they'd undertake as a part of their regular activities. But it was listed in our items under economic development, so we wanted to make sure that we reported back. So council, that's all of the different areas. I'm happy to take any additional questions on the economic development section or any of the other areas. But to be clear, what we're seeking from council today is either, and it could be a mixture of both, if there is a specific thing that council wanted to do, then a recommendation from committee to council to do the specific thing at the specific amount would be helpful. If there are other items that committee wish to see a greater level of detail, perhaps a draft program, and where we would start to see one report that would be focused on one specific theme, and administration would do the work of developing a draft program for your consideration. Those would be things where you would make a motion to direct administration to develop a draft program on the specific thing up to a specific amount. So on the one hand, we're sending things up to council if there's stuff you know you want to do now, or on the other hand, we can send things back to administration and ask administration to develop a draft program. An example might be a program to provide utility rebates. Administration would need to define specifically who that is, or council would need to define who it is. Administration would need to draft a program and come back to council. If council wished to move forward with the advocacy on land rent, for example, there's not really a program to establish there. You could simply say, yes, we wish to do that, and we're willing to dedicate a certain amount of money to it. But we are looking for some motions on council to essentially, again, narrow that funnel down, so we start to identify what it is that council wishes us to take action on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given, for all of that information and for taking us through it so well. I think this is a good time for your opportunity to address this agenda item as a whole. Councillor Butler, if you'd like to.
Well, thank you. I wasn't looking for a particular opportunity for myself, just to point out that I thought we should allow Mr. Given to go through his advice on all of the items before we start to really get into debating the merits of each point. But I would like to actually ask a question with respect to the destination management plan for a little more clarity from Mr. Given, if I may. Mr. Given, I think that from a couple of comments that I had in the community around that item, many people hear destination management plan and think, oh, destination marketing plan, that's what Tourism Jasper does. Why would we wade into that field? I wonder if you can offer a little bit more clarity on how a destination management plan is not a destination marketing plan, though it may, I suppose, encompass one. And I suppose how, without wanting to anticipate the outcome of a study, how the municipality of Jasper specifically could and might be become part of a destination management plan. Our organization has traditionally seen itself as fairly separate from the industry represented by Tourism Jasper and the Chamber of Commerce. Maybe that's not advisable. Maybe this is a way to begin to change our thinking on that. Can you provide a little more clarity on what a destination management plan might look like?
Yeah, Deputy Mayor McGrath, through you to Councillor Butler. So the distinction and acknowledging that the experts in that would certainly be Tourism Jasper, they'll be able to speak to this at a better level of detail. But from my experience, a destination marketing plan is really about going and selling the attractions and businesses that are located within a place to people that are outside of that place, and saying, come to our place because we have these things. So a plan of how you're going to market your destination to people outside of the region, and to encourage them to come in and visit the region and spend their dollars here. So it really is about marketing and selling ourselves to the outside world. A destination management plan is more holistic in that it really looks at how the community operates. And when I say community, I use the broadest sense of the term. The community being the operations of the municipality, the approach that is taken in terms of delivering business services, the way that businesses deliver their services. It could extend into branding. It could extend into municipal operations. And an example that I would make would be how municipal operations connect to people's experience of place. I think it's probably well understood by council that if the municipality chose for own purposes and under our own direction to, and I will come up with an unusual example, to theme all of our street furniture with a dinosaur element. That's possible. There's nothing that says that the municipality of Jasper can't do that, but it would be really not in alignment with the community that we're trying to develop and the overall way that we our efforts as a municipality should and could connect with the overall efforts to have a cohesive and consistent approach to our destination, to our community, which is a destination. So I appreciate that is not as clear as maybe you'd like. But the destination marketing plan is about selling ourselves to others. The destination management plan is about how we choose to operate within our community, which obviously connects to the type of community that we have to offer to people who may come here. So they are interrelated, absolutely. And Tourism Jasper absolutely would be focused on destination marketing. The idea of an integrated destination management plan is that ability to have a cohesive approach to community operations, both in the public and private sector.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Councillor Butler.
Yeah, thanks very much. And, you know, it's an intriguing idea, and one that the more I think about it and understand better what it might look like, the more I feel myself in support. It strikes me that a couple of areas of decision-making that we have wrangled with in the past year or so it might be easier to make informed decisions under the umbrella of a destination management plan. And those two things that I'm thinking of are outdoor seating and paid parking. Having a destination marketing plan might help us to contextualize those kind of decisions that we're faced with now and that we'll be faced with in the future. I'd like to think that that might be an outcome of having a destination marketing plan. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor.
I mean, management.
We knew exactly what you meant. Any other questions for administration before we move into debate on the items? All right, is there any councillor prepared to start us off with the list that administration is requiring to advance any of these items to a regular council meeting or for further information to be gathered from administration for our use? Go ahead, Councillor Butler.
Thanks. Well, I appreciate all the suggestions. I really appreciate hearing Mr. Given's perspective on them this morning. I'm left with a few thoughts. I like the idea of utility rebates. I think that some businesses and some residents have been more severely affected by COVID, and I'd be in favor of a program like that with the proviso that it should be, qualification should be income-based or revenue-based, if that's a better term in the case of businesses. I think that if we go down that road, we should do the best we can to ensure that we're helping those who are most effective. And I think the only effective way to do that would be to look at 2020 income as compared to 2019 income. So if you've lost your job and your family income is considerably decreased, then I think it's a way in which we might be able to help. I agree with the comments on business licensing fees. I think it would be very hard to target that in a way that would be helpful to those most effective and probably honestly not worth the trouble as compared to some others. Recreation fees, I think it's a small thing, but could be really helpful. Again, firmly based in the income range. Families who find themselves unable to afford to utilize some of our facilities, I think we could help over the next 1 or 2 years. But again, I think it should be income based. I'm not much in favor of using this fund for advocating on the land rent issue. I think that's a really important issue, but I think it's a long-term issue. And I think land rent discussions are very closely and intimately related to jurisdictional issues that we have around planning and development authorities. I think they're closely connected. It's complex. I think we would be jumping the gun if we leapt into that right now. I don't disagree with any of the advice offered, except that I think we have to, as I said, connect it very closely with jurisdictional discussions and the entirety of the founding documentation and agreements defining the specialized municipality. Very important, but maybe not really a COVID issue. I'm very attracted to the idea of working on a destination management plan. I think that could really help us to find ways to improve our community coming out of COVID. The labor market analysis strikes me as something where we could spend a fair amount of money to tell us what we already know. I also think that managing ourselves as a labor market could be part and parcel of a destination management plan. And I would suggest that we consider rolling questions of labor market considerations into our destination management plan discussions. finally, I'd like to say that I strongly agree with Councillor Journeau that one thing that we have not really discussed, but we know needs to be discussed, is questions of tax deferral. There are going to be, particularly businesses and possibly residents, simply unable to pay their 2021 tax bill. And we need to get on with discussion of what deferrals look like and consideration of interest rates. So whether that involves use of this fund or not, we really do need to tell the community what they can expect with respect to deferrals of their taxes. So those are my thoughts on each of the items that we talked.
Thank you very much, Councillor Butler. Any other comments from councillors? Councillor Journeau.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, Madam Chair. I agree with everything that Councillor Butler just mentioned. I don't have anything to add. Would you be looking for a motion to move to the next level debate? Sorry. And if so, I'm prepared to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Journeau. I do have one question for administration on the recreational fees section. When I was an outreach worker, if families were connected with community outreach services, they had a pass that they could use at the activity center. So that would be an assistance for those members of our community who truly need it, and not need it based on income verification, need it based on non-judgmental ways of understanding that everyone once in a while is in need of complete support. So we do have children's passes already funded up till they graduate high school. And we do have this program in place, but I would like confirmation from administration to know if that program through community outreach services, if you're connected to an outreach worker, if that still exists for use at the aquatic and fitness center for recreating.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor McGrath. I will have to confirm that. I believe it does, but before I say with 100% certainty, I'd like to get a confirmation. But yes, I believe that program does still exist through COS. My understanding is it may be funded from other sources. And you are also correct that right now, my understanding is that council has previously directed that youth under a certain age can use the aquatic center absolutely free of charge. And so, you know, I think a number of the other programs or costs related to participation in recreation might be the fees that are charged by the operators. And so whether it's Jasper Minor Sports, the gymnastics group, I think that the fees that are charged may come mostly from those areas. And thanks very much to the team who have been able to confirm that COS support does still exist. So families who feel that they are in need do have a source that they can go to for subsidy for recreation fees currently.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given, and a really wonderful opportunity to plug a Jasper Community Team Society Community Caring Fund section of our budget with the JCTS as well. We do have a program called Child and Youth Participation Fund. So if there was a struggling family that could not pay for their child's recreation, say their sport registration, they could go to Community Outreach Services and seek assistance through Community Outreach Services for registration fees. And the Jasper Community Team Society works hard to keep that reserve available for families in Jasper. I am in support of most of what Councillor Butler suggested. I definitely see the value in keeping the land rent advocacy on the table, but removing it from the COVID relief and finding those dollars. I like the idea that Councillor Keller-Harambe suggested that council's budget might even have some remaining funds to move into that advocacy. And I would see that as really valuable at a future committee of the whole meeting to discuss. And I do also see the value of having a separate conversation on tax deferral and interest rates, as Councillor Journeau and Councillor Butler suggested. Those are excellent ideas that we must not lose sight of as we move into the deadline for taxation to be expected. I also agree that the business licensing fees is fairly insignificant as a business owner who's had my business hit fairly hard. The $165 didn't do me too bad this year. I could definitely pay my business license fees, but I think it needs to be in the range of $5,000 to $10,000 to provide meaningful impact and meaningful value to aid businesses at this point in time after so many months of being impacted. The tax rate stabilization fund, or putting the remaining dollars into something of a fund to mitigate future tax increases, I think is an absolutely wonderful idea. It's where we need to get to as a community. And I really liked the idea that Councillor Butler suggested of, and I don't know enough about what the labor market analysis actually is and tangible, because I'm not an expert in that field, but I do think if it could be tied in somehow to the destination management plan, that does make some sense, or if the two could be linked. The only one that I'm not quite sure of on how I sit today is the utility rebate. I want to make sure that if we move forward, I guess this would be where we would direct administration to come forward with a program, and where that program went would still be up for debate. And I want to make sure that the people that are living and working and operating are the people that are actually getting the relief, and finding a way so that it directly impacts the people that need it most. And I guess that would be determined by the outlining program that administration would bring back to us to find some level of certainty within that request. So as it stands, should we move through each section and see by way of motion if council's interested in each area and its necessary next steps? Or what way would we like to move through this process to give our list today to administration? Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. I'm cobbling together what might be wording for a motion to direct administration. However, I have a couple of other questions for Mr. Given. I guess the first is this. The one area where council had already given direction with respect to utilization of some of the COVID recovery fund was a income-based daycare portion of $30,000. And I noticed that we haven't heard anything back on that. It seems to me that this would be the time to discuss that. And I wonder if there has been any progress made by administration in looking at how utilization of that $30,000 fund would look. And I also would like, I'll wait for that and then I.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Mr. Given.
Yeah, thanks very much, Councillor McGrath. Yeah, Councillor Butler, administration has been struggling with that motion and direction from council. The way the direction was set up, the amount was removed from the department, and there wasn't sort of clarity given on how council wished to apply that. My understanding is that the daycare fees largely are already subsidized, and there is already some matter of means testing that is applied to daycare fees. So there is already a system of that application. It is an area where administration will be seeking additional direction from council about what council's intent was. That amount was, as council will remember, was removed from the departmental budget and set aside into the reserve. In order to apply an increased subsidy over what already exists, it would essentially have to be new money that was added into the budget rather than money that was reallocated from within the budget. So there may be some additional intent that was not clear in the budget discussions, and administration is seeing that in the context of the overall strategy for the childcare in the community, that we would be coming forward to council with some additional request for direction. At this stage, though, the daycare is continuing to operate at its limited capacity, and the people that require subsidies are receiving them to the extent that's possible. The biggest question that arose for the community and users of the daycare was if the transfer of funds to the reserve out of the operating side of the department meant that fees were going to increase, and it was very clear that that was not council's intent to increase fees for any of the users, and so we've been able to communicate that to the parents, but administration is going to need to seek some additional direction from council on what the intent was with transferring funds from the general department budget and segmenting them off into the specialized reserve. So that's an area where we're going to have to come back with an additional request for direction, and we were seeing that in the context of the overall child care strategy for the community.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given. Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given. I guess one suggestion and one comment. The suggestion is that administration, if this is a concern for administration and administration is struggling with how to proceed, then by all means, administration should come back to council for discussion of that. And the second is a comment where I suppose we may just have to agree to disagree, but I don't think it is fully fair to suggest that the funding was removed from a departmental budget because the budget hadn't been set. And I know it's a fine point, but the departmental budget hadn't yet been set. So we did not take away money from the departmental budget, in my view, but perhaps that is, as I said, something where we have to agree to disagree. But I would encourage admin to come back sooner rather than later for the completion of that discussion. My second question is actually going back to the land rent advocacy issue. I guess I'm still curious as to why that specific suggestion, not being in the view of most of us, I think COVID related directly, why that is brought forward in this context at this time. And I wonder if I'm missing a piece there, if there's some further clarity as to why that is being recommended. And I'll say I asked the question in this context. These recommendations are all, I think, really well vetted, considered, and thought out by administration. There's nothing sort of random about it. And I'm a little confused about that option, and I'm wondering if there's any more insight just before we sort of drop it off the list, as I think maybe we're about to do.
Mr. Given.
Sure. Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor McGrath. And Councillor Butler, to be really clear, for both council and for the community, with respect to the child care issue, I want to be very clear that what council did was reallocate within the existing budget. So no money was lost from the overall municipal budget. It was merely reallocated. And so that is 100% true. And you're right, if my wording there before was imprecise, I want to make clear that what I understood to happen was there was a reallocation within the departmental budget. And so I think, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be a little bit more specific on that. With respect to the advocacy on land rent, the reason that it's here in the context of COVID recovery is the ongoing benefit that it would have to businesses and residents in terms of reducing the overall tax burden. But more to the point, through COVID, the federal government actually reduced land rent, the requirement for the municipality to pay land rent. They specifically, in the federal rent abatement program that applied to many businesses and that people could apply to, and property owners could apply to subsidize renters, the federal government actually applied that to Jasper. And so through 2020, Jasper basically got a deferral, well, not a deferral, a cancellation of our land rent. And I think that provides a specific opportunity for us to go to the federal government in this time where everyone is interested in recovery, particularly in tourism communities, and say, this abatement that you provided through 2020 is what needs to continue for our community that is largely tourism based to recover economically. Additionally, we see a current federal government that is very interested in supporting municipalities directly. This federal government has a very close relationship with municipal governments, and my administration suggestion here is that those two things together, the unique circumstance of the example of abatement of land rent in 2020 and a federal government that seems to be very open to working with municipalities, provides a window of opportunity that likely didn't exist in the past and may not exist in the future. And so this really is a recommendation that says, we have a current example of where the federal government said, hey, you don't need to pay land rent because of COVID. We should use that opportunity to go forward to the federal government and say, our community will need to have that abatement for a number of years in order to support local recovery because we are a tourism-based community. And I would suggest again that there is a window of opportunity with this particular government in that they have demonstrated that they're very willing to hear municipal governments and work directly and very closely with them. So that's why it is here. And just if I could, absolutely, if council wished to direct administration to engage a consultant to do so within existing funds, we could do so. To be clear, though, there isn't any existing funds that really are available for this purpose. To my knowledge, there isn't this amount of money sitting within council's budget that's unallocated to a purpose. Council may remember that there one area where, and I'll choose my words carefully, where I believe there was a specific intent to reduce, the amount was in council's own budget. Council said, we're going to look at ourselves first and we're going to reduce some money out of the council budget because we know times are tight. And so I think council showed leadership there, but it does mean that there is not an excess of money available in council's budget. Administration could, if council wished, undertake this activity and just have a recognition that it would be an unbudgeted expense. And as we get towards the end of the year, we would have to see how the books, looked at the end of the year. And if it ended up that we were, that all things being equal across all the different areas of the organization, it works out fine, then that's no problem. I think the reason that it's here is administration suggesting a little bit of dedicated funding would allow us to have the resources to go after this and to know that those resources would be covered and supported by council, specific council direction. So those are the two reasons, Councillor Butler, why it's here and why it's here in the context of COVID recovery.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given. Councillor Butler.
Excuse me. Thanks very much, Mr. Given. I think we were all aware that there was some land rent mitigation offered to the community through COVID, but it had slipped off my agenda in thinking. So I really appreciate, and it causes me to feel a little bit different about that view, about that question of land rent abatement, and to see it as something that is in fact a little COVID related. And I mean, in a way, where we choose to take the money, if we decide we spend the money, it's going to come from reserves, because as you pointed out, it's not like we have money sitting there for that kind of an undertaking. So the COVID relief reserve is part of a broader amount of reserves that we carry. So I feel a little differently and supportive of moving forward with that. Councilman or Deputy Mayor McGrath, if you would like, I've been sort of framing a motion to which items could be added or subtracted. If it helps to move the conversation forward, I'm happy to offer some wording.
Yes, please, Councillor Butler.
Well, I would suggest that for the moment, and Mr. Given will advise whether it's the sort of motion that he thinks is needed at this point, but I think we can move as committee to direct administration to prepare programming proposals for the following. I think we've come to consensus on utility rate rebates, an income-based program for utility rate rebates. The second point would be a destination marketing plan, including labor market support. The third would be land rent abatement. The fourth would be tax deferral. The fifth would be income-based support for daycare. Those are the items that I have that I think we sort of have built consensus around, leaving out the items where I think we built consensus to not move forward. But before I place the motion on the table, I'm happy to hear any thoughts on whether that's a good list, so that we don't necessarily need to get into amendments.
Thank you very much, Councillor Butler. Discussion on the list presented. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, I would just like to support what Councillor Butler has put forward. And I after Mr. Given's description why we should have the advancement of abatement of land rent within this and using COVID recovery monies, I'm sold on that one as well. So in Councillor Butler's proposal.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Journell, then Mr. Given.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support all the proposals that Councillor Butler has so graciously prepared for us, and I would not be submitting any amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Journell.
Yeah. Deputy Mayor McGrath, thank you. Just for administration's clarity and for council's consideration, I'm wondering if there is maybe a slight difference in the motion, in that there's sort of two categories of things that I think I heard Councillor Butler describe. The first category is things which need to be better defined and come back to council for final approval. And that would be the utility rate rebates, the tax deferral, and the income-based, sorry, I'm understanding they're mostly income-based, but the support for daycare. Those three are ones where I think I'm understanding council saying, go define the program, come back and show us what it actually looks like. And so you would expect us to come back with a report on each one of those independently that would have all the details. The other class of items here are ones which I think if this is where council is intending to go, you're essentially saying, yes, this sounds good, go ahead and activate this. And that is the destination management plan and the land rent abatement advocacy. So I think the one would be, the first class where programs need to be developed, direct administration to develop a program on A, B, and C. The other type would be committee recommend council approve X dollars for destination development plan and X dollars for land rent abatement advocacy. So I just see them as a little bit different because and I'm wondering if council sees it that way as well. Because the two, certainly we can act on much quicker. The others, we need to develop programs around.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Mr. Given. Councillor Keller-Harmpy has her hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. Given, for that. To you, Deputy Mayor. Mr. Given, we talked about the destination management plan, maybe incorporating some of the labor market analysis. Will you be coming back discussing that with the other partners, that you may need some more money than the 20,000 if you're going to take that angle as well?
Deputy Mayor McGrath to Councillor Keller MP, if council wanted to find the amount of money that they wish to dedicate to that, administration would work with the partners to identify what's possible within that amount of money, recognizing that there may be external funding sources. And so it really would be for council to say, this is how much we want to dedicate. Administration would work with the partners to develop a scope that we would go out to the market to find consultants for. I think that, so labor market analysis is a specific thing, and there's a discipline that somebody could do that. But labor is not independent of the overall destination management. So there certainly would be a segment on labor market, but we shouldn't expect that it would be as deep analysis as would happen in a dedicated labor market study. So I hope that's helpful, Councillor Keller-Harmpy. Labor would be a part of the destination management plan, but it won't have that deep level of fine-grained detail that a dedicated labor market analysis would yield.
Thank you, Mr. Given.
Thank you very much for your question, Councillor Keller-Hrampe, and for Mr. Given's response. Councillor Butler.
Thanks very much. Well, maybe what we should do then is just shorten that list for the moment for a motion to direct administration to prepare programming proposals and leave the destination management plan and land rent abatement for separate motions, since administration has already attached proposed amount of money to those. So I would suggest, I will move that we direct administration, that committee direct administration to prepare programming proposals for bullet 1, an income-based utility rate rebates program. Bullet 2, a tax deferral program. Bullet 3, income-based support for daycare, and leave it at that. That's direction to come back to us with a framework for programs for those 3 areas. And then I would suggest we could move separately based on the information already given to hit the start button on the other 2. So I'll let that motion stand if that's all right with everyone.
Yes, thank you very much for the motion, Councillor Butler. Is the motion clear to all councillors? Is there any debate on the motion? All right, I have nothing to add to the motion. Councillor Butler, would you like to close? Thank you very much. And I will call the question. All in favor? That motion is carried. So council can expect for that recommendation to move administration forward to come back with defined programs for utility fee rebates, tax deferral, and childcare subsidies. And we have 2 remaining items from the list that will require separate motions and defined amounts attached to the motions. Is there a councillor prepared to present one of the 2 motions? Councillor Keller-Hrampe?
I'm prepared to move the economic development plan forward. To make a motion to direct administration to work with Tourism Jasper on development of the destination marketing plan.
For the amount of?
I believe it needs to be higher if we expect labor as part of it. I would suggest that we donate 30,000. How does council feel about that?
Councillor Butler.
A couple of thoughts. I'm probably satisfied with the increased amount, given that we do recognize the need to take a fairly broad lens and include labor market considerations. And I'm always hesitant to put more money than what is recommended, but I do absolutely have confidence in administration to be cautious and frugal and spend it as we go and not just use it because it's there. So I'm in support of that. I'm just wondering about the motion, the wording of the motion where we specifically reference Tourism Jasper. This could be a multi-partner undertaking. And I think what we're really mean to do is to give administration the go-ahead to begin the process, but not to define who the partners might be. It could be other partners. So perhaps we're better to leave it without naming any specific partners. Could be multiple partners, but I don't feel very strongly one way or the other with that.
I can revise my motion that we direct administration to use up to 30,000 of the COVID relief funding to develop a marketing plan with a labor market analysis part of that plan.
Thank you very much, Councillor Keller-Hrampe. I didn't hear exactly what you said. Did you say destination marketing plan?
Yes, I did.
Destination management plan.
Destination management plan.
Perfect.
It's on the brain.
Thank you very much for the motion, Councillor Keller-Harempy. Is there any questions or debate on the motion? Councillor Junot.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do not agree with the increased amount. I see ourselves as simply planting seed money for this. It should be totally at the left with the private sector. And they already have competent machines in place for management plans. They have a large pool of resources. And I'm sure that's all part of their ongoing activity. So by putting money in, we're becoming more and more of a partner, and I would prefer to see us in a reduced amount to simply provide seed money for maybe a new venture that's going on. But I do support the idea of, on behalf of the community. But again, the private sector should be doing most of that. We have, quite a few organizations that, we have tourism, we have large properties that do a lot of marketing, and we have a Chamber of Commerce. So I'd rather leave it to them rather than see us take on more of a role. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Junot. Any other debate on the motion? Councillor Butler.
Well, I just feel like we should maybe try to achieve some consensus on the amount of perhaps an amendment that we could vote on so that we would end up with a motion that would receive broad support. I'm not sure what others are thinking with respect to the amount. I guess my other thought on the amount is the administration did recommend $20,000, as with any program, if in building out the program, because we have so little idea what the program to create a destination management document would look like. We have so little idea of it that it's so hard to put a number on it. Administration could, of course, come back with the suggestion of a change. It wouldn't be the first time that was done. So I'd just like to see strong consensus here, and I'm wondering what others are thinking about the amount.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor Junot, is there an amount that you would be satisfied with to have included in the motion so we can achieve greater alignment?
Well, I would follow administration's recommendation myself. That's be my preference. However, before I submit an amendment to Councillor Keller-Harampi's motion, I'd like to have some consensus as to where we're going to go on this. I follow the administration's recommendation, and I think that that's ample. We should be seeing ourselves as seed money providers and not take on a larger role. So discussions from the other councillors before I submit an amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Junot. Councillor Keller-Harampi.
Just Councillor Junot, and the reason I suggested 30 is because we were asked for 20 for partner to conduct a labour market analysis separately. And Councillor Butler had suggested earlier that maybe as part of the destination management plan, that the labour analysis could become part of that. So that would require more consultation within the community and putting the plan together. So I thought that if we designated another 10,000, then they would be sufficient seed money, because otherwise there were two separate items. And because if it's going out to a consultant, maybe that we had some extra money in there so that when they bring back a plan, that could be part of it.
Thank you, Councillor Keller-Harampi, for clarification on that. That's the way that I saw it as well. If we were going to take it upon ourselves to broaden the scope of work, that we would have to increase the financial allocation to the request. Councillor Junot, did you have something to add?
Well, just a little clarification, please. Are we combining two items into one for a total of 30,000?
Yes.
More or less.
More or less, thank you. Yes, I would support that. I believe that those things should be undertaken by the private sector. So I think that the amount that we're providing is seed money, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Juneau. I see Councillor Butler with his hand raised.
Just want to make another point with respect to the inclusion of labor market considerations in the work, and that is that we recently heard that our local employment office is experiencing real concerns with respect to support from the province. And that is one reason I think it is important that we do include advocacy and considerations around the labor market in this work. And while it's a blunt tool to just put some money toward an undertaking like that, I think it's really important at this particular time that labor market concerns be addressed. And that's one reason I am actually in support of combining the two pieces and increasing the amount to a halfway point, as Councillor Keller-Hempy has suggested.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Any other debate on the motion before I call the question? Hearing none. Does the motion need to be repeated for any councillors? Great, all in favor? That motion is carried. There are none opposed. Thank you very much. Special thanks to Councillor Wilson and his piece of equipment showing up on his camera to assist us with our low attendance today. Much gratitude to that, Councillor Wilson. And we have one remaining motion required on the subject of land rent abatement. Is there a councillor prepared to present a motion? Councillor Butler.
If no one else is wishing to do so, I will move that Committee of the Whole direct administration to allocate $20,000 from the COVID relief fund for advocacy on land rent abatement.
Thank you very much, Councillor Butler, for the motion. Is there any debate on the motion? Councillor Wilson.
Sorry, thanks for that, Councillor Butler.
We have lost you, Councillor Wilson. We'll come back to you if you get better reception.
Made the motion, I just couldn't get to my...
Oh, sorry, Councillor Wilson, we missed most of what you stated there. You look to be a little bit better right now with your reception. Go ahead.
My apologies, I'm in support. I would have made the motion. I just couldn't get to the camera in time, but thank you for that, and I'm in support of it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Butler?
Yeah, you know, I thought maybe that's exactly what Councillor Wilson was trying to do, but and I would prefer to let Councillor Wilson make the motion because I actually thought he was meaning to, and then he couldn't get in. But if Councillor Wilson wishes to make the motion, let's do it that way, please. Thank you.
Great.
Well, I'll take that motion from you then. Thank you. I'll make the motion, please.
Thank you very much for your motion, Councillor Wilson. Any debate on the motion? Well, I agree that this is really important advocacy. It contributes to the sustainability of our community in so many ways. And this is important work that absolutely needs to be continued. As Councillor Keller-Hempy stated, it's work that's been done in the past, but it's work that we haven't seen in this 4-year term. So it's certainly no better timing. And I love the strategic relevance that Mr. Given has presented and how it was presented to us. It couldn't be more timely. So thank you very much to administration for having the foresight here. And thanks, Councillor Wilson, for the motion. Is there any further debate, or would you like to close debate, Councillor Wilson, on your motion?
I have nothing further.
Thank you very much. I will call the question. All in favor? And that is carried. Councillor Wilson's screen is frozen. Oh, there's your hand. Perfect. Thank you very much. My one last question on this item before we move through today's agenda further would be the remaining dollars. Does a motion need to be made on what council intends for the remaining dollars to be there for, or that will just sit in this reserve as it currently is, with decisions to be made at a later date? Mr. Given.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Mayor McGrath. As the discussion before in response to Councillor Butler's earlier question, I think that this really can be done either way. If council wanted to specify right now, that would provide some limitations on the types of programs we might offer to you. Or administration can offer programs to you and you can decide how you want to cost them, and then the remainder, of course, is left over. So I don't think a motion is required at this time. If council's intent is to see the programs administration might recommend, decide how you want to resource them, and then at that time, make a motion that any remainder be dedicated to the reserve, that is completely possible. I don't think that we need a motion ahead of time to do that. Although if council really wanted to, you absolutely could. So again, it is that sort of, I said cart and horse, it also could be chicken and egg, whatever sort of analogy you want to use, it can be done now or it can be done later, and administration can work with you for approach.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Given. Does administration have all they need from council on agenda item number 8.1? Wonderful, we moved through that and it's 11:12. So for the comfort of both the listeners and councillors and administration, I will call a 10-minute recess, taking us to 11:22 a.m. We'll see you back shortly. Great, I believe Councillor Wilson is there as well. So we will be moving on to agenda item number 8.2, the development of a traditional land acknowledgement. Mr. Given.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor McGrath, and just recognizing that we are one day after National Aboriginal Day, it's a pleasure to be bringing this recommendation forward. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Riddell, as this comes from the Municipalities Inclusion Committee, and Lisa has been working closely with the Inclusion Committee in this recommendation and report. So I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to present her report.
Mrs. Riddell, welcome to our meeting. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath and all of council. In front of you, there's a request for direction on the development of a land acknowledgement. This is a recommendation that's coming through the Internal Inclusion Committee, and that committee is funded through a grant from the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association called the Measuring Municipal Inclusion Grant. So it's a grant-funded special project, 28 months in length. And the aim is really to work together across departments on identifying ways that our municipality can increase its overall level of inclusivity. So the two recommendations you see here are coming from this group. The group is comprised of members from across the organization. And when we've talked about reconciliation as a way that we can improve the organizational level of inclusivity, the development of a land acknowledgement has been raised. Traditional land acknowledgements are being used as a practice of reconciliation, and recognizing that all of us here in Canada are treaty people. Actions the municipality can take when it comes to reconciliation or opportunities to honor the history and diversity of Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis people in Canada, to recognize the strength of present-day Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis communities, and to acknowledge the importance of preserving that culture, language, and livelihood. Land acknowledgements are a way to recognize what is known of past Indigenous usage and occupancy of land. They're often thought-provoking and educational. They often are conversation starters, or they keep important conversations going. So the municipality's Internal Inclusion Committee recognize that developing and utilizing a land acknowledgement would be a meaningful step towards reconciliation here in Jasper. And endorsing the development of a land acknowledgement is in line with the municipality of Jasper's vision of fostering a welcoming and inclusive community, and its commitment to keeping the interests of the community as a whole in mind, advancing basic respect, truth, and human dignity. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Riddell. And on behalf of the Inclusion Committee and as a member of the Municipal Inclusion Committee, I thank you for being here today and for presenting us with this. I specifically really, as Mr. Given has already stated, appreciate its timely nature being here today, one day following the Indigenous Peoples Day. And while we're all uncovering more and more truths and grieving so deeply, it's a very important subject to be here. I specifically really respect and acknowledge that you mentioned the 57th call to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in this report, and the specific ties to the Indigenous people of Jasper mentioned in the report. So thank you for the meaningful intention that you included as you prepared this for us today. Council, are there any questions? Before us are two recommendations. The first being that committee recommend council endorse the development of a traditional land acknowledgement for use by the municipality of Jasper. And also a separate motion would be needed to recommend council direct administration to develop a land acknowledgement policy for review for a future committee of the whole meeting. Mr. Given.
Deputy Mayor McGrath, if I may, just in terms of process here, on this item and the one that follows, you'll see that we are suggesting that committee recommend council direct administration. Just for additional clarity on many issues, you'll see that we suggest that committee direct administration directly. The reason for the little bit of a nuance here is given the important nature of both this item and the one that follow and sort of their overarching impact on the community and on the municipality, administration felt it was appropriate that this actually be direction from council as a whole rather than at the committee level. There are other areas where you may see us ask committee to direct administration to develop a policy. We acknowledge that all policies can only be approved by all of council, but in this instance and the one that follows, given the important nature of the policies, we felt it was appropriate that direction to administration come from council while we are introducing it here. So it is going from committee to council, although that won't always be the case on other policies.
Thank you very much for the clarification, Mr. Given. Is there any questions from council? Any debate on the topic? Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. Ms. Riddell, thank you very much for your work on this and on the next request for decision. I really appreciate the attention and I appreciate the well laid out context for our consideration. I have only a couple of thoughts. One was I did think that the 2-point recommendation is a little cumbersome, but I'm not bothered by it. I thought if we endorse the development of a land acknowledgement that it would come back to council to ultimately endorse the land acknowledgement itself. But if administration is most comfortable with that additional step, I'm fine with that. I have only a couple of thoughts. One question, Ms. Riddell, is your group been working with Parks Canada in, I assume you have some idea of what the land acknowledgement would look like. Have you been working with and are you aligned with Parks Canada? It seems to me to be sensible that we would be, and I just wonder if you could fill that in for me a little bit.
Mrs. Riddell.
Sure, thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath, through to Councillor Butler. The group at the moment is an internal group, and so we have not yet reached out to Parks Canada. We would see that as a really logical next step should committee choose to endorse the development of a land acknowledgement and the development of a land acknowledgement policy. That would be a really natural step, and I think the committee would be, that would be the next thing we would do.
Thank you for that, Mrs. Riddell. Councillor Butler.
Great, thank you. I think that would be advisable. I know Parks Canada has done a lot of work in this area, so I would be comforted knowing that they were in the loop. And I guess my second comment would be this. I think simplicity is our friend in developing a policy like this. And one of the reasons I've suggested working with Parks Canada is that I think the process can become a little fraught when it comes down to naming names and choosing what groups should be acknowledged specifically by name, as opposed to just, Treaty 6 and Treaty 8. And that's where I think care is required. I am absolutely certain that those discussions have already been held, but it's like, who do you invite to your birthday party? Once you get started, it's hard not to, it's hard to know where to stop, and you're probably going to offend somebody. So I'm fully in favor of all of this, and would mention only that sort of caution as you proceed. Thank you.
Mrs. Riddell.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor McGrath. Through to Councillor Butler, I should also mention, I appreciate you bringing that up, and that the content within the RFD, the names of the groups that were mentioned, were taken from recommendations from Parks Canada. So discussions with Parks Canada was what led me to include those groups and those names in that RFD already. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And I know our partnering agency of Parks Canada has developed these relationships for many, many years. And those relationships, quoting the present quote of "nothing about us without us" is a helpful phrase in recognizing that anything in relation to reconciliation absolutely involves the Indigenous communities as well. So thank you very much. Is there a councillor ready to present a motion on this subject? Councillor Journeau.
Prior to presenting a motion, I have further discussion. First of all, I wouldn't want to see us spend a whole bunch of time and money on this. This is just another step in decades and years and centuries of movement towards, we call it reconciliation, but we're not. We're just redefining the word, saying, well, we're here, you're here first, but we now run this and it's okay. I have lots to say on that. And I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but again, spending a lot of time on this without having the other side in this, to me, is not fair. This is what's happening all along in the development of this country. And we've always said, well, yeah, that's the way we're going to do it. And fine. And this is just another step. It's prepared by the established society without input from the other group. And we're saying, yeah, this is going to be okay because we're going to pass it for us. I think, so that's why I don't want us to spend a lot of time on that. I'm delighted to see some of the progress that's been made for assimilation. What's the other word I'm looking for? We have to get more in our group. Acknowledging these things, to me, doesn't solve that. I am delighted to see the opening of a high school just outside of Calgary here yesterday, because that is one step where we are going to provide them with the school that they're going to run by their group. That's one step towards them coming into our society. But this stuff is just, okay, we are the established society and we're going to pass these to acknowledge it, but it's all okay. But it's not okay. So my point is here, we shouldn't be spending a whole bunch of time on this.
Well, thank you, Councillor Journeau, and I respectfully disagree. I think we should be spending many, many months and years on this. And in fact, the harm that's been done over 7 generations is going to take more than 7 generations to undo, and really points to the background highlighted in the report. that the 57th call of action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission reads that professional development and training for public servants, that we call upon federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal governments to provide education to public servants on the history, including the history and the legacy of residential schools, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, treaties and Aboriginal rights, Indigenous law, Aboriginal Crown relations, and that this will require skills-based training in intercultural competency, conflict resolution, human rights, and anti-racism. This is certainly important, and I will leave any other comments to any other councillors that wish to speak. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you for that, Councillor McGrath, or Deputy Mayor McGrath. And I would be willing to make both motions. You just would have to bear with me. I have to get back to the screen to read them. But so I would make the motion that committee, or sorry, that I think the council recommend to council to endorse the development of a traditional land acknowledgement for use by the municipality of Jasper, and that committee council recommend to council that direct administration to develop a land acknowledgement policy for review at a future committee of the whole meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Is the wording of that motion what you'd hoped it to be, Mr. Given? That council recommend to council or committee recommend to council? Committee.
Mayor McGrath, committee, yes. Yeah.
Perfect. So we'll just make that small amendment to the first statement. Any debate on the motion presented by Councillor Wilson? Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson, for making the motion. I am fully in support of this. Once again, I'm very appreciative of, I think a good amount of time has already been spent by the committee on this. I think it is worthy of time well spent, and I'm fully in favor and looking forward to seeing the next steps on this. It is an extremely important issue and one worthy of our time and attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Butler. Councillor Keller-Harempy.
I'd like to thank Councillor Wilson for making the motion, and I totally agree with Councillor Butler and your comments. We do need to spend time on this, and I look forward to it coming back to committee of the whole. And I'd like to thank Mrs. Riddell and her team and the committee for bringing this to council. It's timely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Keller-Harempy. I too am looking forward to continuing to work with the Inclusion Committee and continuing to bring really meaningful, important pieces of inclusion and anti-racism forward in the municipality of Jasper. And we're leaders in the community. And when we implement something, we can lead by example and demonstrate to all other organizations within our community on appropriate, inclusive actions to move organizations forward. So thanks for all of the comments, and I will call the question. All in favor? That is carried. There are none opposed. Thank you very much for agenda item number 8.2, Mr. Given and Mrs. Riddell. We will move to agenda item number 8.3 that also has Mrs. Riddell presenting to us.
Absolutely, Deputy Mayor McGrath, that Ms. Riddell isn't going to get away that quickly today. This is another recommendation coming forward from the Internal Inclusion Committee, and again, for another policy. This one, though, I believe actually has a draft policy attached, which Council obviously has had an opportunity to read, but I will let Ms. Riddell introduce the specifics.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Mrs. Riddell.
Thank you, Mr. Given, and thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath, through to all of Council. This is coming to Council or Committee of the Whole as well as part of that same project. And a really key component of that project is identifying ways that we can embed inclusivity into the organization longer term beyond the end of this grant funded project. And so one of the first things the committee did was review the process through which incidents of discrimination are handled by the organization, as well as any policies related to diversity and inclusion. So this process did involve a review of the existing Respectful Workplaces policy. It is a policy that exists to create awareness, educate, promote harassment-free environments in the workplace, prevent harassment of any type, including sexual harassment of its employees, and to deal quickly and effectively with any incident that might occur. So while this is an excellent policy that really looks inward at preventing harassment in the workplace, it doesn't include as much an outward-facing component, and the Inclusion Committee wishes to recommend that committee recommend to Council the adoption of another policy, one that encompasses not only the organization as a workplace, but also the organization in its service to the public and its role in the community, modeling organizational equity, inclusion, and diversity to more effectively serve its diverse community through equitable policy and operations that allow every citizen to participate in all aspects of community life. The draft Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Policy is the culmination of months of collaborative work between Inclusion Committee members and hard work of the Community Development team. Adoption of the policy would allow administration to take steps to ensure that organizational strategic planning and business planning are done through an equity, diversity, and inclusion lens, and that the organization's priorities are in line with its vision. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Riddell. Once again, on behalf of the Inclusion Committee, we have been working for many months on this policy, and we are delighted to have it before Council today for your perusal. And are there any questions or any comments on the policy that's in front of us on agenda item number 8.3? Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Again, I'd like to thank you, Ms. Riddell, and her entire team for this work. This is good work. I think this policy is really well written. I'm fully in support. I agree with the concept of adding another policy on top of what we already have in place. I have two comments to two items I would draw your attention to. I would suggest minor revisions under definitions. The equity bullet, I'm going to be honest, I read that and I just don't know what that means. And if it's meant to be a definition, this policy is in its very nature aspirational. And for sure, there's going to be some, I don't know what we would say, some mushiness in some areas, but I just don't know what that means. And I would suggest that if we're talking about definitions, that really isn't a definition. It says what the word implies, but I think when you include something in definitions, it should say what the word means. It's just not clear to me. And then I'm a little unclear on the last bullet in definitions, diversity and inclusion. We define diversity and we define inclusion, but that last statement to me is not a definition at all. It's an important, perhaps aspirational statement. And I think it probably should be dealt with in the purpose section and not as a definition. I find it incongruous. I read it again, I'm wondering, well, why is that there? We've already included, or we've already defined both diversity and inclusion. So why are we now defining diversity and inclusion? So I would suggest those two, just some attention to those two items, but I won't question it when it comes back. I don't pretend to suggest that I have deeper insight into this than those who have looked at it. Thank you very much for all that good work.
Thank you very much, Councillor Butler. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Journeau?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for all the good work in this, Ms. Riddell and administration. And this is why we have it in committee. Councillor Butler pointed out two very valid points, and that's very good. They're very good. I'm glad to see this. but also we have to remind ourselves that we're not needing this because we were exclusive in any way, shape, or form. It's just a further step in the understandings of inclusivity, and I support this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Journeau. I support this as well. These are actions that we can make as a local government to begin dismantling systemic oppression that has and does exist, and work to become a more inclusive organization and a healthier place for everyone to work. I love the Inclusion Committee's policy that is also desired to come forward, that continues it not only as an inward facing policy, but allows it to be experienced in the community as a whole. And I think that's a really important aspect to what we do as public servants. Thank you very much. Councillor Keller-Hrampe.
I just want to thank Mrs. Riddell and her team again. This is awesome work, and I am prepared to make the motion if you would like. Deputy Mayor McGrath?
Yes, please.
That committee recommends council endorse the adoption of the Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Policy, and that committee recommends council direct administration to return to committee with a plan for policy implementation at a future committee of the whole.
Thank you very much, Councillor Keller-Hrampe, for your motion. Is there any debate or questions on the motion? Councillor Butler.
I have a question. In light of the policy development and review policy that we will be coming to later in the agenda, I was curious about the wording in the second bullet, where administration will return to committee with a plan for policy implementation. Does that mean administrative procedures, which is the language we use elsewhere? If that's what we mean, I don't really have a problem with the wording, but I noticed it's actually different from the wording in our policy development policy.
Mr. Given.
Yeah, thanks very much, Councillor McGrath. With any policy, of course, there is the implementation phase. It is one thing for council to state its policy intention, as you're doing here, and then administration has the obligation, once a policy is adopted by council, to act on that policy. In some cases, there's a procedure on now to follow this policy, we will do these steps. In other cases, it may be that administration will then bring forward recommendations to council for programs or services that would support or follow the direction of that policy. Upon approval of the policies by council, administration would look to draft those procedures or really consider what the operational impacts of the policy direction given by council are. If there's a requirement for an administrative procedure, that is something that is approved by the CAO, but I likely would bring forward the administrative procedures to council for information so that council can be aware of the connection between their policy direction and the operations of the organization.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given. Any other questions or debate before the question is called? Hearing none, Councillor Keller-Hrampe's motion is on the table. Does it need to be recited? Everyone understands the motion? Great. All in favor? Just waiting to see you, Councillor Wilson. There you are. Great, thank you very much. There are none opposed. That motion is carried. Thank you very much to the Inclusion Committee for all of their hard work for about 12 months now almost. We've been meeting as an internal Inclusion Committee, and thank you, Mrs. Riddell, and to Leanne, sorry, I'm blanking on Leanne's last name right now, for all of the work that you have brought forward from the Inclusion Committee and for everything that you do on an ongoing basis.
Thanks very much.
We're moving on to agenda item number 8.4, Culture and Recreation Services Review. Mr. Given.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor McGrath. I know Ms. McNabb is here, and again, I will allow her to make the presentation and to highlight the themes that came through the public engagement. But just as a reminder, Council initiated a review of the culture and recreation services and facilities by hiring an external consultant. There was significant public engagement that happened pre-pandemic, and then the initiative lost a little bit of steam as Council and the organization's focus was really on pandemic response through 2020. This has been restarted. The report was essentially finalized and then put forward to the community to provide any last comments that they may have. Administration ran that consultation over the last number of weeks from May 11th to June 3rd, and Ms. McNabb can speak to the themes that were identified by the respondents. And again, you know, for Council's information, this was essentially saying, this is the plan that has been developed based off your input. Is there anything left to say? Administration has the comments here and the themes, and I'll pass it over to Ms. McNabb.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given. Welcome, Mrs. McNabb.
Hello there. Well, my camera's taking a minute to come on. So I just would like to know which area Council would like me to go through first. Do you want me to kind of review the questions that came up from the survey that was just posted from our community, or would you like me to go into the review a little bit?
Maybe going through the review, Mrs. McNabb?
Okay. So on the review, we did note, and this also came up as a question on the documentation from the public. It was noted on page 9 about the budget. I'm sorry. It was noted on the budget on page 9 that there was a $200,000 discrepancy for the library cultural expenses. What that was is at the year end, when wages are transferred into the budget accounts, it did not show up right away. So the documents that the consultants were using hadn't been completely finalized and hadn't seen the actual numbers for the staff wages. So those numbers should be adjusted, and I do have all the actual numbers, which I can send directly to Council if you'd like, or I can provide those to you verbally right now.
I think, Ms. McNabb, if we go through the highlights, that certainly was one we wanted to ensure that Council and new administration had looked into. It was raised by a couple of specific comments, and it is essentially because administration wasn't directly involved or engaged by the consultant at a couple of different stages, they were pulling their data that was incomplete. And so we were able to go through and actually identify the full year-end data where the library transfers had been fully reflected. The initial data the consultants pulled their information from missed that part. And so that's one minor correction to the content of the report. We thought it was important to highlight for Council, given that it's a significant number and that it was specifically identified in some of the public comments. But I think from there, we may want to identify the other main themes that came from this round of public engagement. It is, of course, there in the table, but maybe Yvonne, you can speak to those in a little bit more detail.
So one of the comments in the concerns or comments that came back from the public was a question about volleyball and why that was not reflected in the actual report. Now, one thing about volleyball, we have beach volleyball within the municipality, but we have a brand new league, which at the time of the review was not in existence. So there was no volleyball association, there was no volleyball group. The people that use the volleyball courts were camps and just public drop into the swimming pool and would go out and play volleyball while they were at the swimming pool. So that's where that one differentiated completely. There was a question on the T ratings. So when you go through the ratings, which I believe was on page 61 of the document, it'll say T ratings, so T2 or T1 or T10. That means that those ratings were tied. So there's more than one particular item in that that reflects that T. With regards to the performing arts venue and having the use of the stage and the use of more cultural events in the commemoration park. So that's something that's in the process right now, and that we've asked to budget for electricity to be able to host those events on the stage. But it's also getting more cultural events happening in Jasper. With regards to the gymnastics question, there was a question in there about the gymnastics club and the location. They are in a shared space right now, which is a multi-purpose space. So if there is a large event, they will be asked to take down their equipment. The large event will go in, run their event, and then they can put their equipment back up. Previously, the gymnastics group was in the multi-purpose hall where they had to set up and take down daily. So now they're being asked to take down maybe 2 to 3 times a year, depending on the number of events that occur. There was also a question in here about sponsorship and having Parks Canada and CN potentially contribute money for a new arena or new facilities or the assistance in our particular facilities. And that is something that has come forward to council before, and maybe we need to look at it again, was the naming rights and sponsorship for the municipal facilities. With regards to programming and recreation and culture, information and programs, this is something that it's an online or ongoing work that we're doing with trying to get the information online so that people can actually see the information. They know where to go to, a consistent site to be able to go to and be able to find information on closures. We're working with our Facebook page to do that and to tie it back into our website. So online bookings for lessons is available. You know, there is online bookings for the fitness center presently. So there's quite a bit that we've come full circle with and are working towards. With regards to the rest of the report, there's a lot of information in here with regards to best practices, with leveraging the arts and culture, placemaking mechanisms, benchmarking. All of those things are in the report, and I do believe that we need a presentation from the consultants that did the work so that they can indicate how they arrived at their recommendations and their information. I wasn't privy to how they were asking the questions. I know what groups they asked the questions to. We provided them with all the information of every possible group that is associated within the municipality of Jasper, like the whole town itself. So any not-for-profit organization, any groups fitness groups, any sports groups, any culture groups. All of those names were provided to our consultants, and they did try and meet with as many of those groups that were willing to come forward. So the information was thorough with the groups that were willing to come forward.
Mr. Given.
Sure. Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor McGrath. So as Ms. McNabb stated, administration believes it'd be appropriate for committee to recommend this plan forward to council for ultimate adoption. We would work with the consultants to have them attend at council so they can present the major findings and themes of the report for council's information, the community's information, when this arrives at the regular council meeting, should committee choose to move it forward. And again, really the context here is that we brought the report forward. Council asked us to do that last close of community consultation before essentially closing the book on the report. Administration has completed that community consultation, and then now the final step is for council to formally receive the report. And we would ensure that the consultants that were engaged by council to do this study were on hand to be able to respond to any detailed questions that council may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given, and thank you very much, Mrs. McNabb. Are there any questions from council? Understanding that we will have another opportunity at a regular council meeting with the consultants present to ask questions. Is there a councillor prepared today to move that committee recommend council adopt the Culture and Recreation Services and Facilities Review as presented? Councillor Butler, is your hand raised for the motion or something?
Yes.
Thank you very much for the motion, Councillor Butler. All in favor? I'm just waiting to see Councillor Wilson. Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. And that is carried. There are none opposed. And that's expected to be back before us on July 6th. Is that correct, Mr. Given? Great, so we can expect to see this in 2 weeks' time. Agenda item number 8.5 is the Skatepark relocation public engagement results. Mr. Given.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor McGrath. I'll maybe just do a brief intro. Again, this is a result of committee and council asking administration to do some additional engagement with the community. Ms. Nadon is on, I believe, and I hope that she's available. She had a couple of competing items, but I see her name on the screen. So I'll leave it to Ms. Nadon to speak to the high-level findings from the public engagement with respect to Skatepark location. Christine, if you're there and available, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given, and welcome, Ms. Nadon.
Good morning, Deputy Mayor McGrath, Council. Thank you. As presented in the report, we are bringing forward the information we received from Jasper residents on the relocation of the skate park. And we've included all of the open-ended answers to the questions, which formed the main part of the survey. So there were no complex logics and multiple choice questions in this one. It was more so an opportunity to collect feedback. And those results are summarized in the second page of the report. So under theme or value, this is following our International Association for Public Participation policy, and therefore trying to capture qualitatively through those comments, what are the themes, what are the concerns from the community? And by and large, the people that are in support pointed out that there's other amenities available there. There's children that might be playing in the playground, and then the other kid can go and play in the skate park. And it's already close to schools, a central location, somewhere you can see easily, which is a bit of a downfall of the current location, which is kind of hidden between the activity center and the high school. So those were all positive items that were brought forward. And then the noise, or how much noise will be generated by a concrete skate park in that location. And of course, in relation to Alpine Summit Seniors Lodge being directly across the street, and how to mitigate that was the main main concern that came up. And as outlined in the report, we are suggesting that there are probably ways to mitigate that, either through engineered methods. So when I say that, I mean fences, berms, whatever that might look like. I am not an engineering expert, but that's what I mean by engineering mitigation measures, and or regulatory, like putting some hours of operations on the skate park that could take into consideration its location and things like that. So from an administrative standpoint, we very much clearly received the message that there were some concerns around the level of noise and people frequenting that area later in the evening. So we actually did proactively reach out to Alpine Summit Seniors Lodge, to the staff there. And as explained in the report, we ended up receiving some survey comments. So some of them are clearly residents identified themselves in the comments as residents there and filled out the survey for themselves, while others signed a letter, which a copy of the text is attached to this report. And that's it. We wanted to be sure that we did talk to the people that were there, because they were immediately in the affected area. So we kind of went the extra mile and reached out to them there. So that's why you see those results presented. And yeah, so our recommendations are there. And the last paragraph in the report sort of suggests how administration would see moving forward with this. But of course, we're here for council discussion and direction on this item. Thank you
very much, Ms. Nadon, and thank you very much to your entire team. I'd say this is an excellent opportunity to read the engagement from the community on this topic. It's such varying responses and such solid work that's been done. And would like to thank you and your team for everything that you put into this. Is there questions or comments from councillors? Councillor Journeau.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Nadon, for your presentation and bringing this up at this time. I'm very keen on this whole item. I've read many of the comments that are made about the noise and so on and so forth. I have just this past weekend spent a bit of time at one park, and I've also spent some time at the one in Hinton. The new construction that they are making there's not much noise in the operation. There might be noise and collision and yelling and screaming, but there really isn't the noise that there used to be at skate parks, when they used to be just sheets of plywood and ramps and stuff that had a hollow sound and it would carry forever. These are solid concrete. There's no noise in the boards and the bikes and whatever else they use out there. So that concern for the senior citizens should be totally, I'm lacking the word, but that's not going to be a concern in my opinion. Secondly, seniors don't have a lot to do. And I've spent a lot of time with my father, who's in an institution. And when I speak to him, if there's a distraction outside, he's distracted to that. I see this as where these people are going to be able to sit and enjoy watching youngsters, in some cases their grandchildren, enjoying this park. And I can guarantee you that these old people that they're sitting in a chair and be able to watch this activity are going to be pleased, more pleased than unpleased. I think that there should be more now we're going to change a bit of topic in the activities for seniors. There should be more for them to observe. And so life for them, I mean, they can only watch so much TV, and outside of watching TV, there's a few activities that are generated, but there isn't a whole bunch. In other words, they need something to do. I see this as something entirely where they just sit and watch kids have fun, and to me that's great. So has my full support. My last request is that when we do the planning, we leave a little corner for a little summer activity of grass hockey, a little hockey park, because again, that would be adjacent to that. It's central, and I think that we should accommodate that. Nothing big. Again, hockey, summer lawn hockey can be quite popular with a proper facility. So I wouldn't want to create this park to eliminate the possibility of including that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Journeau? Any other comments? Councillor Butler?
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. First of all, I'd really like to congratulate administration on skillful and professional implementation and use of our public engagement policy. I have really enjoyed watching that policy enacted on this and also the previous item. I think it's a good policy, and I think administration is using it exactly the way it's intended to be used. So having said that, to Councillor Journeau's point that seniors need things to do, I look forward to seeing Councillor Journeau on his skateboard on opening day of the new skate park, wherever it should be built. I am anticipating that with a great deal of pleasure. I think that there's one aspect that we ought to all be aware of, and that is that none of us know what we're talking about here when we're talking about noise levels. And Councillor Journeau mentioned it. There is a great deal of concern around noise without any of us, myself included, really having a sense of what kind of noise levels we would be looking at. But noise levels are easily measured. This is done all the time, whether it's for buildings where a large intake or outtake fan is located and considering the needs of residents, or whether it's around traffic. There are little gizmos that people can stand with there and measure noise levels and then consider distance. And as Mr. Nunn said, mitigation measures are appropriate. So, but even before we start talking about mitigations, we should, I think, take some efforts to research and understand just what are the noise levels that we would be dealing with. Because of course our experience is formulated around, or is based on the existing skate park, which is going to be much noisier than another one. So I would just suggest that in addition to looking at possible mitigations, administration actually look at what are the appropriate, or what are the noise levels that would be there. I have a feeling that's what was meant, but we might actually mention that in the motion. Thanks very much again for the work. And I will say thank you to the many members of the community that took advantage of this public engagement policy. That's why we do it, so we can be informed by those views.
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Butler. I agree with all of the points that you made. The residents that have raised concern in opposition about being concerned about the noise, they are definitely requiring an explanation and some further mitigation or some further research to find out exactly what type of noise would be made from the skate park should it be relocated to Ball Diamond A. Is there a councillor prepared to present the motion that committee receive the skate park relocation public engagement results for information, and that committee direct administration to further research how public concerns around noise could be mitigated prior to council making a final decision on the new skate park location? Councillor Keller-MP, you'd like to make that motion?
Yes, Deputy Mayor McGrath, I am prepared to make that motion.
Thank you very much. Would you like to speak to the motion?
I would like to thank everybody for giving their feedback, and I really appreciate all the comments from our seniors at Alpine Summit. And I think for them, it's important that we continue and do some more research into the noise levels and whether this is the best location for our skateboard park. And I look forward for this coming back to a future committee of the whole for further discussion.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kelleher-MP. Councillor Butler.
Thanks, Councillor Kelleher-MP. And I would ask, would you be open to a friendly amendment to actually include the words "to research anticipated noise levels" in the motion? So we're making it clear to the community that we are going thorough and actually be aware of what noise levels we expect.
For sure.
Thank you very much, Councillor Butler, for that amendment. Is there anything further from any other? Hearing none, I will call the question. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you very much, Ms. Nadon, and to everyone behind the scenes who worked on getting that public engagement to us and to the residents of Jasper. As Councillor Butler suggested, it was very well done and an excellent use of our engagement policy. Bringing us to agenda item number 8.6, policy development and review. Mr. Given.
Thanks very much, Councillor McGrath. There is nothing more government than a policy development and review policy. But that's what we have in front of you. Ms. Nadon has taken the lead on this, and certainly she can speak to the details. But essentially, Council identified a desire to review a number of existing policies and also acknowledge that our current policy on policy development doesn't lay out a process for reviewing policies. And if I may, from the perspective of somebody relatively new to Jasper, I think this may be a part of the fact that the municipality is rather young, only just now coming up onto its 20th anniversary of incorporation as a municipality. And I think we are nearing the time where a number of things that were new once are starting to show their age, and it is time for review. And so Ms. Nadon has, I think, actually a very direct way to be able to initiate a systemic approach to regular review of policies. And then there is a recommendation or discussion to be had about how do we start that regular review and what are the priorities. So I'll turn it over to Christine to lead you through the specifics of the report.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Ms. Nadon.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath. As Mr. Given outlined, we are proposing a framework for review, which was the request from Council at the last Committee of the Whole, where we received direction. And essentially, we are suggesting that all of our policies and procedures should be reviewed on a 4-year cycle from the respective policy effective dates. So understanding that we currently have a bulk of our policies that are dating from 2010. If you take a look through our policy manual, you'll notice that date comes up a lot. And that's because that was the last sort of systemic reformatting and in some cases review of some of the policies. And Ms. Byrne and I tried to determine how many policies monthly does that represent. And it's a bit of an intimidating number at the beginning, but certainly as we progress through it, some of those policies might drop or be combined, or anyway, we feel like over the 4-year cycle, we could probably get a pretty good hand on what's happening with our policies. And so yeah, so there would be a time frame and a structure there that would be facilitated by the Legislative Services Coordinator. So understanding that certain policies fall within specific departmental areas, and directors and managers in those areas should be taking ownership in ensuring that the content of those admin procedures mostly, but also some changes, if some changes in policy are warranted, that they are bringing those forward in coordination with the Leg Coordinator. And then, but to get us started, and I think that's the piece that may be of interest to Council in addition to that 4-year cycle, is that we are suggesting, as per the second bullet in the recommendation, that committee direct administration to establish a policy review priority list to guide the review cycle. So where do we start here? And there would be an opportunity for Council to direct that formally by providing us with the names of the policies and procedures you would like to see reviewed first. So sort of a twofold approach. So inclusion of a 4-year cycle in the policy itself, but then the creation of a policy review priority list, which, not unlike the motion action list, would allow us to keep track of what the priorities are, what the timeframes expected for them to come back to Council. And then I guess the last piece would be that we would discuss this at a Committee of the Whole monthly. And policies would come forth for review and for consideration by Council as they are ready, but then acknowledging that in some instances, some of those policies are quite complex and it might take more than a month to get through them, right? So the priority list would allow us to keep track, and then the work would be continuous on the administrative end, and council providing us some input and direction. So we've also provided a draft policy attached to the report to provide council with a bit more of a look and feel for what it could look like. As Mr. Given outlined, our policy development policy was quite dated, and so we didn't track changes or anything like that because there were just too many. It felt like it was the best method was just to bring forward a clean version of the policy as we see it. And of course, we're very much open to some input from council on there, as the policy part is very much within your realm. And I'm happy to take any questions. It's a bit of a, it's not that complex, but I feel like I walked you through it, but I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nadon. Questions, comments from councillors? Just for awareness, Councillor Wilson has left the meeting, so there are now 4 of us. We have quorum still. Councillor Butler.
Sorry, I was unable to unmute. And having unmuted, I've lost my notes. Now I have my notes back. Thank you, sorry. Ms. Nadon, thank you very much for this good work. I appreciate it very much. I will differ with you on one point. You said it's not that complex. In a way, it's potentially complex. This is sort of the head policy of all our policies. So it is important, and I can see that a lot of work has gone into it. So don't do yourself a disservice by suggesting that it's not complex. I have a few comments. I would like to suggest outside that this should come back again to committee for a more robust discussion. Could turn into a long meeting if we dive too deeply into this today, but I have a couple of questions. I struggle with, at the outstart, the definition of policy as being priorities and rules adopted by council to reach its long-term goals. I think policy has broader implications for the organization as a whole, rather than the focus there being primarily on council and its goals. So I don't have any specific suggestions, but I would query the wording there. I also think that the statement also known, or the phrase also known as policy statements, is just not necessary. We're talking about policies. I have a question under responsibilities, point 1, council. I notice that in all cases throughout here, the wording council policies has been used. Key issues for council policies: approve new council policies, review existing council policies. It implies to me that there might be some other sort of policy, and I'm confused by that. Why are we referring to council policies as opposed to policies? Is that actually intended to represent a subset of policies? I would assume not, and I wonder why that wording seems so deliberately chosen. And I'm interested in hearing a thought on that.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Ms. Nadon.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath, through to Councillor Butler. I don't believe there's any intention other than clarifying that policies are in the realm of council. I mean, maybe it's redundant, is sort of what I'm hearing from you, that policies are council documents and procedures are administrative documents. And I think that's a broad understanding that we share, and certainly if the wording is problematic, we can remove council, the word council, from in front of policy. So there, directly to your question, there was no intent. Okay. Or
fine, thanks. I would actually suggest removing it, because when I read that, we often talk about council policies in council, and I think generally referring to policies around council procedures, how council would behave, council policies that apply to council. So when I see that adjective there, it almost implied to me that it's a policy that applies to council. And I'm happy to hear that that is not what was intended. I also have a little bit of trouble understanding under 3 development department directors and managers, the bullet points 3 and 4, I don't know what is meant by require research on the policy issue to be conducted. I think we need to tighten that wording. I guess I just hold up the lens. If I read it and I'm not quite sure what's meant, then maybe it's not clear. And then the 4th point, determine the need for creation of a policy and procedures. I don't think directors and managers do determine the need. Obviously, council in the end determines the need. I think the wording there should be around make recommendations and not determination. So there's a couple of points where I think some wording could be adjusted. And to that section, here's what I think we need to accomplish here. And the reason I think that I brought this forward, my observation has been, as we've all said and understood, and I don't mean to beat this drum, but many of our policies are out of date. And as a result of them being out of date and not updated and kept up with the times, staff and administration, I think, often find that the policies are untenable, unworkable. And so we diverge from policy. And I think what needs to be clear here is 2 really simple principles. One, that policy when set must be followed by administration, period. And when administration finds that it is unable or it is ill-advised to follow policy, then the policy has to be kicked back for review. There's really only 2 ways that it can go. We have policy and it is followed. When it can't be followed, then we have to review it and change it. And that is the spirit in which I brought this suggestion forward, because I so firmly believe that council must remain in the realm of policy level decisions, and where my observation has been that when we find ourselves getting, as we often say, into the weeds, it is often because our policy is inadequate or we feel it's not being followed. So I hope that those 2 fundamental principles, at least I think they're fundamental principles, will be accurately reflected in the responsibilities outlined. And I had one last point at the top end where we're talking about definition of policies. I think that I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought already. Oh, I'll probably come back to it later at another meeting. So thanks very much. I hope through that rambling onslaught, you're able to pick out some of the points that I thought might be addressed before we look at it next time.
You made some excellent points, Councillor Butler. Thank you very much for your perspective. Is there anyone else wishing to comment or provide suggestions on this item? And hearing nothing, is there a councillor prepared to move that committee recommend council approve policy A001, policy development and review as presented, and that committee direct administration to establish a policy review priority list to guide the review cycle, and that the following be the first priorities? I guess we would need to determine what those first priorities were, but should that be saved for a future committee of the whole meeting and we move this forward today? Sorry, Councillor Butler, I missed your hand.
I was going to suggest, thank you very much, that we at this meeting accept this for information and request that it be brought back at a future committee whole after consideration of some of the suggestions made.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Mr. Given.
Sorry, I just want to clarify there, Council. Appreciating the suggestions for revision, and I think administration could process all of those prior to bringing forward the policy to Council for approval. So is that the intent, or just to receive the policy here and not have it move forward for Council consideration? We certainly are happy to capture the amendments offered. I think the suggestion of the potential redundancy of council policies, I think, you know, it's similar where we refer to the municipality of Jasper policies. Well, we know it's the municipality of Jasper because that's who we are. So I think administration certainly would accept that and can make that change. Also, the suggestion of the also known as policy statements, I think we heard that. And under the department directors and managers, I think the point about require research, I think we can tidy up that wording slightly. That would probably be more like conduct research on the policy issue, or to identify research on the policy issue to be conducted. And then also the point about determining, that is fully understood by administration. It's not up to administration to determine the need for a creation of policy. It might be to identify the need or potential need for the creation of policy. But I think we can massage those points that were identified by council in a revision that we could bring forward to the next regular council meeting. I appreciate that council may wish to have more discussion and dialogue about the relative priority and sort of what is the starting point, given that we have a large number of policies that could be reviewed. Really, administration is ready to take council's directions on what their priority areas or themes are. But I don't think the establishment and refinement of the policy development and review policy necessarily needs to wait on council establishing those priorities. So just want to make sure that we're not, that we are giving the right amount of time for discussion about council priorities, but if the policy with those changes could be acceptable to council, then administration is ready to move that forward through the process so we can actually get on to working on policy review rather than working on the policy to create a policy for reviewing policies.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. You know, I really do appreciate administration's willingness and focus on moving this forward. But my suggestion was, and my motion would be to request that this return at the future, hopefully the next committee of the whole. I think it's important to respect that there's only 4 of us sitting here now. I don't wish to belabor it, but I myself would like to suggest that this come back at the next committee meeting. My fear is that if it comes at a council meeting, it is just more difficult to delve into some of the views that councillors may have. So I would prefer to see it come back to committee. Yes, it would mean 2 weeks longer to reach a decision, but under the circumstances and attendance at this meeting, that's what I would be comfortable moving, as in making a motion.
So that motion is that we accept this recommendation, or sorry, this review as information for today, and to revisit this at a future committee of the whole, which brings us to July 13th, I believe.
Well, thanks. I think I did use that word, but I mean, we're doing more than accepting it for information. We've made some suggestions for edits, and my motion is that after considering suggestions for edits, administration bring this back for further discussion at the next committee of the whole meeting.
All right, is that clear to everyone? Is there any debate on the motion? Hearing none, I will call the question. All in favor? That is carried. There are none opposed. And Mr. Given has indicated to me that the agenda item number 8.7, Principles for Utility Rates Bylaw, might be a lengthy conversation. And in the interest of council and administration and the public's nourishment and working best with fueled brains, I will call a recess. Council, do you believe that 30 minutes will be sufficient enough time to have nourishment for lunch and resume at 5 minutes after 1? Councillor Butler, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Sorry to sort of supersede your question, but I will say that I think that the discussion around principles for utility rates bylaw could, in fact, and needs to be quite a long one. I agree completely with that. I am planning to suggest, in fact, that we, in this case, simply accept for information and defer and bring it back for consideration at the next committee of the whole meeting. It's a long agenda today. I really do appreciate this coming back the way it has and in the timing it has. It was a commitment that administration made, but I would proffer that suggestion that in fact we just defer it. So I jump in and mention that because that might change your view as to taking a break if council agrees that that would be an appropriate action.
Yep, thank you for the suggestion, Councillor Butler. I agree that having more councillors in attendance for this discussion would be of benefit to all of us. Is there consensus on deferral? Mr. Gibbon.
If I can, just as a matter of process, Council, can I ask that you make a motion to table discussion to a specific date rather than defer? Defer is a bit of a, doesn't provide the same sort of clarity. I think our procedure bylaw allows for tabling. Council said we're not going to discuss this item at this time. We intend to discuss it at another specific time, which I think is clear to everybody. But just so that we can have that on that motion made clearly, because deferral doesn't quite do the same thing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gibbon. Councillor Butler.
That was, I used the term loosely, that was my suggestion, in fact, and I think our next committee meeting is July 13th, am I right? Mm-hmm. There's a 5th. Yeah, so I move we table this discussion until the July 13th committee of the whole meeting.
Thank you for your motion, Councillor Butler. All in favor? That's carried. There are none opposed. Thank you very much. Which brings us to agenda item number 8.8, a topic of conversation led by Councillor Journeau on speed limit signs on Connaught Drive.
Councillor? Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for allowing me to speak on this matter. I have communicated by way of email to you and administration my concerns with this. And I continue to believe that the present situation is inadequate to really control the speed of vehicles. And yes, enforcement is a factor, but generally I think we just want to highlight the need for speed reduction as a way of life, as a culture, rather than okay, you're going to be doing this from here on in. That's what's happening here. So I think whenever you have a change in speed limit, it usually is highlighted with pretty dominant signs. The little flashing sign that we have outlining your speed limit, they're becoming a bit. You see them all the time, so that people just don't pay attention to them. They don't realize that they're speeding. And the other thing is that factors, usually speed limits are posted on the right side. So if people are watching for speed limits, that's where they would see them. Here we have one in the middle. So if we want it to be seen, I think we have to put some flashing lights, like I mentioned in my letter, to accentuate and highlight those signs and to achieve the desired result. I ride my bike in that area a lot. I walk a lot in that area. And I can assure you that seldom to none will people follow the 30 kilometers. So thanks for allowing me to speak on that submission.
Thank you very much, Councillor Journeau. Any other conversation on this agenda item? Councillor Keller-Harvey.
I travel the route a lot to and from work, and I have to say, I do find it better this year than last year. And I think coming into summer when we have more and more traffic, it will automatically slow down. I think when there's no traffic, you're right, Councillor, people speed down. But I have to say that flashing light that tells you it's 30, it automatically, it stops me. Even at 5 o'clock in the morning, it stops me. The flashing light that we bought over the pedestrian lights over for the school, is it possible during the summer season when school's out that we could bring them down towards the theater area? Because I do find with the trees in that in summer, sometimes that pedestrian area is really hard to see, that if we had those flashing lights down there, that would make a big difference.
Mr. Given, you had your hand raised.
Yes, thanks, Deputy Mayor McGrath. I just wanted to acknowledge that we're trying to create a little bit of a new process here to give council members an outlet for observations that they have around the community or issues that are raised by community members to you as council members, and a forum for you to bring them to the council table to see whether your colleagues have an interest in taking any specific action. So I really appreciate Councillor Journeau being willing to be the first one up on deck with this new process, and for him raising this observation about speed on Connaught. Administration, with the notice given by this showing up on council agenda, administration had an opportunity to have a bit of a discussion. Councillor Journeau's other observation that, you know, the use of the flashing sign and its impact starts to deteriorate after they start to become commonplace is really a principle that applies to all signage. And you sort of get, administration's view is that we can get an escalation of signage. We need bigger signs, we need more signs, and then all of a sudden it's a whole bunch of signs and those ones lose their effect. And then we need more and bigger signs. That notwithstanding, we also really appreciate that, particularly now with the patio seating, that many members of the public are sitting much more close to where vehicles are traveling. And that really can impact people's perception of the speed that a vehicle travels at. So we've done a little bit of legwork and have, if council is interested, administration could do a bit of a very brief and not particularly labor intensive, but study to ascertain the actual speed of vehicles traveling along Connaught. Because at this stage, well, I appreciate that certainly there will be that the vehicles that we all know are traveling much faster than the speed limits. I'm not sure that we can say with certainty right now that all vehicles are regularly traveling above the speed limit. And so administration's suggestion, if council wish to, would be to conduct a bit of a brief analysis using actual equipment that can record the data. And then we could present back to council, if you so desired, what that data looks like to identify whether there is a observable, you know, regular breaking of the speed limit that would suggest that extra enforcement or signage is required, or whether it is merely a perception issue. Because I know that when I stand next to a vehicle, any vehicle that goes past me feels like it's going fast. If I'm much further away, it doesn't seem that it's traveling as fast. And so that's where an actual analysis might be useful. I've had a conversation with another municipality that is willing to loan us their automated equipment that can track speeds, and then we could actually do an analysis of the actual speeds that people are traveling along that stretch. Then council could decide what approach they might wish to take with this issue. Just provide that for council's information. And if council wish follow up, and again, just as we start to refine this process, I suppose I would ask if there was a motion to be made out of this directing administration to do something. It would be helpful to us to know if there is enough support among council members to explore the issue and dedicate that administrative time. On some there may be, and some there may not be, but that motion really helps us identify, yes, this is something that there is a majority of council members that want us to follow up on this item.
Thank you very much, Mr. Given. Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank Councillor Journeau for bringing this forward. I'm not sure I think a motion is necessary, but I'm certainly prepared to support one if one is made. But there are a number of easy additional mitigations that administration could just do here. And sometimes a little discussion like this could help. What pretty universally helps to slow cars down is, even though they might be temporary, orange cones and orange stanchions that you see on the highway where there's a construction zone, and people are pretty tuned into that. Also, perhaps, even if it was temporary, a bright speed zone ahead sign in the block prior. And that could even go to temporary speed bumps that I've seen installed. Those I think they're probably made from recycled tires that can be placed for part of the season. I don't really know how they get anchored, but that kind of thing I see done in other communities, and then they can be taken away for snow removal season. So maybe some additional mitigations to just make sure people are slowing down at that important area or in the block prior could be looked at by administration. But my observation has been that the addition of the flashing sign thing there has, certainly it has an effect on me, and I think it has helped quite a bit. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Butler. Any other comments from councillors? If there was to be a motion passed, I would agree with administration borrowing the device to find out if we have an actual issue in our downtown with speeding traffic or not. I can't say that I notice necessarily and or have the expertise to analyze that on my own, but I would be in favor of running through a process, and if that process led to additional mitigations being warranted or necessary in our community, I would be in favor of following the process. Councillor Journeau, did you wish to speak?
I'm not sure. I'm kind of mixed. I agree with Councillor Butler. I think there's some things we get done without doing a big study. What we want to do is get people to slow down. And if we don't alert them properly, they won't slow down. And I think the existing signage has been used and used and used, and it doesn't do the job. I think that there's things it can do without a big study, just to get people to slow down. I mean, we're not going to argue with 30 or 35, you know, preferably 25 kilometers an hour. Just find a way to get people to slow down. Right now, there's still far too many that drive through here at a speed limits. And I have to admit, these include professional drivers. I saw a big truck yesterday go by. I've seen buses go by. They don't pay attention to it. They just, I have no idea what goes on there. And they're professional drivers. So I just think we have to highlight it more.
Thank you very much, Councillor Journeau. With no motion on the table, I will be inclined to move to the next agenda item, should there be no motion presented. And hearing nothing, I will move us to agenda item number 8.9, public seating and picnic tables in Robson Park by Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. This is a very simple item. I brought this up last year, the year before, and I confess I myself didn't follow up on it. It's been mentioned to me 2 or 3 times by community members. We have such a great space at Robson Park, such an opportunity, and there's 3 lonely picnic tables which seem to have minds of their own and wander rather aimlessly around from time to time, which, all sarcasm aside, is because people use them and they move them and they put them together, which is great. And particularly just now with the need for social distancing and all of that, it's such an opportunity for people who may want to take takeaway downtown and find a nice place really nearby to enjoy a family picnic. I frequently see people using those 3 tables that are there. I see others just sort of camping out for an hour or 2, having lunch the traditional way on a blanket or something. But couldn't we really, in a fairly quick and easy fashion, put some picnic tables into play there or something? I do understand that administration wants to do it right, and the picnic tables that are in Centennial Park are an example of doing it right. They're great, they're permanent, they're durable, they're fixed so people can't cart them off and set them in the middle of the street or something. I get the difficulties with portable picnic tables, but I would like to think that we can maybe, even though I should have thought of this 2 months ago, but even though it's a little late in the season, I'd like to suggest that we find a way to get some picnic tables into Robson Park. That's it, that's all, thanks.
Thanks so much, Councillor Butler. On the topic of picnic tables, I think Parks Canada deserves a little shout out. The elementary school expressed a need for picnic tables outside and around the elementary school, and Parks Canada supplied them with, I believe, lenders until the campground was to open. So the picnic tables that you currently see outside of Jasper Elementary School were provided by Parks Canada in a timely fashion, which was certainly well appreciated by both administration at the school and students at the school to have the opportunity to be outdoors learning. And I definitely support picnic tables in Robson Park, and the more opportunity we can create in our community for safe places for residents and for visitors to gather. And I would say even as far as the term recreate in that line, in November, I tried to bring an idea forward that would implement more of a policy on how to create better spaces to be utilized, specifically as we were experiencing the pandemic. More opportunities to have fire pits, and I would also say that among the community conversation table, I have been hearing of this idea as well, and community development would be an interesting area to connect with on the topic of picnic tables in Robson Park, because they may even in fact have some work underway on this topic. So it's really timely. I don't think it's too late at all. We still have so much of this beautiful weather to enjoy, and if we're in similar circumstances next year, which I certainly hope we're not, there's definitely a need for spaces to sit and to eat and to be in our community. And Councillor Butler, if you'd like to make a motion that committee recommend to council the implementation or the suggestion of picnic tables, feel free to, but I'll take Councillor Journeau's hand raised.
Well, I think we're in as a committee, so I think that we can add to the discussion here. I realize that we are on the subject of a specific location, but I would also like to draw attention to another area which I believe we could enhance our services to our public, and that's right across the parking area that is on Hazel and Connaught, right across from Shell, for lack of a better word. There are three takeout restaurants in the neighborhood, and people use this area a lot. Like, this was very prominent, of course, when the restaurants had no seating, but it is a kind of a nice spot. But then we do lack facilities there, in my opinion. Yes, we do have some tables. We could improve the landscaping. We could add tables, and we could provide smaller garbage bin as opposed to the big compact bins that we've got, because they get a little threatening, especially for young children. I think we could do some work there, and it's along the same lines as providing an opportunity for the public to enjoy the great outdoors that Jasper and Jasper National Park provides. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Journeau. Councillor Butler.
Thanks. Look, I fully appreciate that the right time to bring this up would be in budget time, and I imagine that sometimes for administration probably is nothing more frustrating than having a capital budget passed or budgets passed, which is almost always going to be less than administration hoped. And then here comes a councillor saying, oh, well, here's my pet issue that I think you should go spend money on. So in consideration of that, I would suggest that I will make a motion that committee request that administration consider possibilities to add picnic tables or other public seating in Robson Park. And we'll just leave it at that. I don't want to position anyone or put administration in a vice grip or anything. So I would choose the word request, and we'll just see how it can work out.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Mr. Given had his hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Mayor McGrath. Certainly administration can work with that kind of motion. And if council wish to be more direct and identify some number of picnic tables they wanted to have added, we could also work with that, with the understanding that it would only be done within existing resources, and there's not an intent to add new resources. But if, I think, and we're all working together here for the same purpose, to make a great community. I think if council if there is clearly a desire for from council for additional picnic tables to be added to Robson Park, I am completely comfortable with council being specific, saying so, and saying, and you need to do it within existing resources. And so if existing resources only allow us to get one, well, I guess that's what we get for this year. And we would come back and tell you that's all we could do with the existing resources. If we can get more than that, then we would do so. But I just think it would, you know, if there's a direction council wants administration to take, feel free to say so via motion. And if we can't act on that, then we would have to come back and tell you. But I think the administration consider the potential of, I appreciate that the intent there is to give us a little bit of operating latitude. I really appreciate that that is explicitly what the intent is. But if you want us to add additional picnic tables, I think you're within bounds to say, go and add additional picnic tables to the extent possible given existing resources. And we'll figure out how to do it.
Councillor Butler.
I move the committee direct administration to consider the addition of additional picnic tables for Robson Park and possibly other areas of town within existing resources. Is that clear, Mr. Given? Yeah, I really appreciate you outlining the manner in which this can be brought forward, because no one wants to put administration in a difficult position. None of us are really aware of what the workload looks like and you know, where there might be potential. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much for the motion, Councillor Butler. Any debate on the motion? The wording is clear to all. I will call the question. All in favor? And there are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you, Councillor Butler, for the recognition that that was something that our community could need. And thank you for administration making it as easy as possible to bring that forward. We have no longer an agenda item number 8.10 that was removed from our agenda, which brings us to agenda item number 9, correspondence. And there is no correspondence on today's agenda. And next is agenda item number 10, the motion action list. And as we can see, the motion action list has some changes. Mr. Given, would you like to take us through that?
Council, I'll be brief, appreciating we're in sort of an extended meeting. There are new recommended dates, as you can see. Some of these have been addressed, such as the Culture and Recreation Services Review has been delivered here today. That could be removed, as was the Policy and Development Review has been delivered, but I'd suggest that maybe that be wait to be stricken off the list until it actually comes back at that next Committee of the Whole meeting. You'll see that the timeline has been extended on the Bike Skills Park. That's just reflective of administrative workload and the relative priority of this item. It is not something that's the development of the Bike Skills Park is not going to happen in this summer period. And so administration is just reflecting that that is a little bit of a lower priority, but it has not been lost, and we will continue to work with the cycling club. I will maybe just go to the community garden expansion request. Mr. Greathead and his team have met with representatives from the community garden to review potential sites. The message that I believe Mr. Greathead received was that the organization recognizes that there would need to be some work done, and they were not looking for additional sites in this calendar year. One of the potential barriers is access to water. And so municipal administration has made the offer to the group to identify what their preferred sites would be. Basically just saying, we would love to go here, here, and here, and administration can provide the group some feedback on the technical challenges that might arise, and we would have that ongoing discussion. So administration is comfortable that, administration believes council should know that we are acting on that, but it is more likely that this will come back to council in alignment with that September 2021 timeline with some recommendations for the next season. And that is because we've been in direct consultation with the group, and they were not seeking or expressing a need to have something up and running this year. Really, if you're a gardener, I believe you should have been in the ground already. And I think that that's what they were reflecting to us, is that they did, that the opportunity is passed for this year, and they're satisfied with the work that we're doing with them. So council will see that one come back. And the COVID relief reserve item that is there, so my suggestion would be that on community gardens alternative sites, that we can strike that one, and it can really be, the new date should go along with the item above. September 2021 is actually what we'd suggest, given the conversation that Mr. Greathead has had. The COVID relief reserve concept refinements, this item can be replaced, will be deleted and replaced with the motion that arose from today. And then of course we'll capture all the other new motions. But with those proposed amendments and deletions, administration would recommend the committee approve the updates to the motion action list as discussed.
I'm happy that you included the words "as discussed" and that I was trying my best to keep track of all that, but I don't know if I did a great enough job. Councillor Journo, did you have your hand raised?
Yes, I will make that motion that we approve the update. Right.
Thank you very much, Councillor Journo, for the motion. I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you very much. There are none opposed. That is carried, and gratitude goes out to this motion action list. It keeps us organized. It keeps us on track, and it allows us to be certain that something that is a priority of ours isn't lost in anywhere in the organization. So thank you, Mr. Given, for the motion action list once again. Moving on to agenda item number 11, council representation on various boards and upcoming meetings. Councillors, do you have reports? Councillor Keller-Harempy.
Last Saturday, Mayor Ireland and I had the pleasure of being judges for Lemonade Day. It was a fantastic day. We had 4 entries and we awarded the best booth and the young entrepreneur. It was a lot of fun, and it was great to see young entrepreneurs of the age of 4 upwards in our community getting into the business spirit. With Community Futures, tomorrow I go to Grand Cache for Community Futures draft plan, and I will overnight, and on Thursday morning I will attend the annual general meeting of Community Futures, followed by a board meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keller-Harempy. Any other councillor reports for upcoming meetings? I will report that I have a community conversation tomorrow from 3 to 4 p.m. on the school age group, and then we will be breaking for the summer with community conversations. So that will be the last community conversation before September. And there are no upcoming events listed. We did have a special meeting of council that has since been canceled, so no other meeting this afternoon. I'd like to draw the community's attention to the Canada Day Committee's Facebook page. They have recently made an announcement on what their plans are, and will be announcing various virtual events for the Indigenous community that will be offered through the Canada Day Committee. So please feel free to stay tuned to the Canada Day Committee's Facebook page for more information on that. Is there any other upcoming events that are not listed? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn us at 1:03 p.m. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, but I need 1 minute, so it'll be 1:04. Before I move to adjourn, I just wanted to leap in and take an opportunity that I missed when we approved the agenda to let administration know that we noticed the changes to formatting, or at least I did, in the agenda. We noticed the live links, which move us through the agenda. That is really convenient when you're working online, and whoever thunk that up, thank you very much, that's great. And the bold red headings really helps us to navigate these large packages. So noted, and my thanks on behalf of council. It's much appreciated. No one asked you to do that. Thanks very much. Just wanted to make that point. So I move we adjourn.
Thank you for the motion, and I agree with those links being super, super helpful. I made a note on my note sheet about them as well. Thanks, Councillor Butler. And I have a motion from Councillor Butler to adjourn this meeting of Committee of the Whole at 1:04 p.m. All in favor? And that is carried. There are none opposed. Thank you to administration and all of the work you put into today's meeting. Thank you to the public who attended. And thank you to the 4 lone councillors that made it to the end of this meeting. And special thanks to Councillor Wilson for making the time to come here. And we'll be meeting, we will have no meeting scheduled at this point in time for June 29th. So our next meeting of council will be on July 6th for a regular meeting at 9:30 in the morning. Thank you, everyone, and have a beautiful day.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor McGrath, and thank you, Mr. Given, and everybody, and for all the public.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, everyone. Good meeting.